It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Saturday, May 10th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. As we said, today we're going to be focusing on the constitutional crisis conversation around immigration, deportation. Today, apparently, habeas corpus, due process. Very important development in this story from Stephen Miller. I decided to go a little bit funny with the image for the show today to kind of reference a classic meme, because my opinion around this is not just about the reality of our rights and immigration and the kind of left-right paradigm. It's obvious to me that there's a Zionist overlap to this that is destroying this country, put it very simply. Not about Jewish people, other than the overlap that Zionism has with Jewish people, just like it does with Christianity, like it does with Muslims, with atheists. Very clear to see. If you care about the reality of the story and just don't couch it in one religion or the other. The point is, I believe some people like Stephen Miller are representing something very dangerous for this country, where they are projecting, America first, whatever narrative is being put forward that's supposed to capture the current zeitgeist, if you will. And cut to the chase, he does not believe these things. That's my opinion. And I think even if he does, what his actions, he's just the one example for the image, but most of the current administration or the one before that do not have the interest of the United States first, in my opinion, or their actions, whether they realize it or not, are destroying this country. And I think it's very important to understand my perspective, but even if you disagree with me, how I can show you that those actions are very clearly not in the interest of Americans. Now, this shift around habeas corpus is important. It's a precedent that's been made before from Lincoln. But we're going to go over why, even under Lincoln, it was unconstitutional, and go over the reality and the constitutional reality of the idea of suspending habeas corpus, which is in the Constitution. It is under two circumstances: invasion or rebellion, and only allowed to be enacted by Congress. So Lincoln alone, unconstitutional. So the interesting point of saying back to that and that should allow it today is exactly the problem. It's saying, well, the left did it then, so why shouldn't we do it? Well, most of us, I argue today, are not couched on one side or the other, are saying none of you it's bad when everybody does it. So let's stop pretending like there's an excuse that rationalizes it today. We need to start erring aggressively on the side of our principles, our integrity, our values, because these things are being used against us in pretty much everything I see right now. Now, I want to go through quickly just what we're going to discuss today, because there's a lot of really important things we're going to go over today. Now, I'm going to start with a quick overview and I might as well just show you here so you can see it as we go along. Quick overview of what we briefly pointed to yesterday, because I just as it relates to a conversation that Brooke Jackson pointed out, an AI, and something that's been going around today around RFK Jr. We'll start with that. It should only take a few minutes. I think it's important for you to see, but then we're going to go over Israel and some of the things that are going on in a general sense, the ongoing genocide, and how important that is to two things we're going to start with that are now, I think, straight up, I think lies, but very bluntly. Whether or not they're complete lies or not, it is a propaganda tactic, and I'll go over that, in my opinion, I'm saying. And I'll give you the other side of the story of where I can see this maybe actually happening and why I think that might make sense around the claims being floated that are seemingly baseless at this point, that Donald Trump is going to, one, cut ties with Netanyahu, and two, declare Palestine a state. Certainly hope those things happen. And even, well, I'll get to it all, the nuance of it. I think it's important to see how this plays into a lot of the different things happening, but I wanted to start with why I think those things are suddenly acceptable to the large conversation. And that has to do with, the Overton window and the shift around what people understand around Israel, and why now it's being framed as sort of the prediction of the day, even though it was very obvious, as David Icke has been hammering in, that this was where it was going. And we all should have seen that. And the usual grifters step in to try to act like this is something different. We're going to talk about that point right there around this conversation. But then, of course, getting into the kind of meat of this, the argument of oh, sorry, that's the wrong spot. The argument of habeas corpus, a really important article around the lies around Venezuela that I think is important to start with. And some of the other things I really want you to see we're going to talk about are some of the different nuances around these cases that I think are really profound. For example, Ozturk, Ozturk from the Tufts student is being ordered to be released and what that shows you around how this is developing. We're going to talk about, I don't want to stretch the window, damn it. Oh, well, hold on. As you guys can see for the show, I hate when it changes the window on the screen. For the podcast, you don't care. But I want to get into the habeas corpus overlap. And let's see, some of the other points here. Let me just scroll back. Oh, and that was the other one I wanted you to see before we get started. So you stay tuned to the end. A really important overlap that has to do with the Afrikaners, however you want to pronounce it, from South Africa. And all of this today talking about immigration, and the Israeli influence on that coming through this country. And then at the same time, about to allow South African immigrants with basically no really unfettered access, waving your hand and allowing citizenship, exactly like they're criticizing around Biden, paying for them to come here, all of this stuff, which again, my point is about we should be equally applying our resistance to, let's just say people want to pause immigration. Well, there shouldn't be a caveat for why some are allowed and some aren't. If you agree with it, then you agree with it. Then it shouldn't happen, or either it should or it shouldn't. Or maybe you agree that some should and some shouldn't. And my point is, right now, what we're staring at is an all or nothing kind of perspective where all this has to stop, and then allowing very specific categories into the country, which contradict every other point you're making. And then in doing so, you show us that there's exceptions to certain groups. And of course, I'm going to make an important point today as we end with to show you, surprise, surprise, that the Afrikaners, the Dutch immigrants going back to, the timing of the creation of Israel forward. You can see the alignment of these groups, Zionism, and these groups we're talking about, and how now you have a completely overlapping relationship with the very people he's about to bring into the United States that are basically part of Zionism. And that's not my opinion. I mean, you can go through this stuff that's been there for a very long time. Here's Haaretz, by the way. Let me just do this while we're here. Help me get that line back up. There we go. Cleansed by the Torah, why these Afrikaners converted to Judaism and moved to Israel. Now, for me, it's not about whether they're Jewish or not. It's about the important understanding of what Zionism does to people's perspectives. Now, on that note, let me get this line back up really quickly for myself so I don't lose my mind when oops. Maybe I wonder if you guys couldn't hear me right there. Anyway, the point I was saying, just in case my audio got cut off right there, all of this today, and most of what we talk about, does relate to your life, no matter where you are in the world. Because the point, come back to this article we'll start with from yesterday's show, it's important to see that what we're beginning to highlight, or rather what we're beginning to kind of see materialize, rather, that we've been highlighting, is that this is a global dynamic. Whether it's globalism, technocracy, Zionism, I see them kind of as one and the same. Whether that was the starting point or not, that blob has become one thing as far as I can tell. Always with multifaceted agendas, and they would probably drop each other on a dime should it interest them. But the point is, right now, we can see aligned interests. My point is the supercharged biometric surveillance database overlapping with Elon Musk's surveillance Starlink satellites that are overtaking everything. I mean, literally everything from cell phones to internet to information consolidation, Pentagon having to go hat in hand to him to go, please let this happen in Ukraine. The amount of control with the influence from the platforms, from the amount of money he has, it's not about him in particular. Yes, I find that a problem, but it's anyone with that much consolidation of power, control, influence over information, which is the most important thing in the world. Here, in this show, rather, we go over how that's continuing to develop, and it's becoming something that can't be missed from a globalist perspective. And the people that tend to want to call that out in other circumstances weirdly can't or choose not to connect those dots. So this show, gain of function head fake, was about the point that they were pretending they were stopping gain of function. If you didn't see that, they didn't do that, despite all the people that we keep nodding to who acted like it was the biggest, most monumental thing in the world. And if you actually read the executive order, it makes it clear that not only is it not stopping in the United States, in fact, they're going to become the leader in the versions that they think are okay. while stopping other countries from doing it, or rather stop the funding that they were always sending to other countries to do the thing that they say is bad because they're doing it, even though the U.S. government was the one funding many of them. It's insane. And that goes well back before Donald Trump's administration and through his last administration, through Biden's administration. Oh, that's right, left and right, or just known as your government. So this, as well as the Epstein list manipulation that is yet to materialize, and back to the manipulation of the growing biometric surveillance database that has to do with Palantir, XAI, those two merging to become one kind of joint interest, as well as the X and XAI merging into one thing. It's insanely obvious how all this is happening, and it scares me that some people choose to not want to see it. And I mean people that I know that are close to me, that I know are not some, not part of some agenda, that just want to believe in this administration. So I do know that they are out there. I just have to hope it's not the majority. I think we can see that, but so I wanted to start with that article, and also nod to Brooke Jackson's interview, Meet the New Boss, Same as the Old Boss, where she highlights that in a recent tweet that Trump sides with Pfizer. The Trump DOJ has now reiterated that the COVID injections are safe and effective, and doubling down in the same direction. So on that note, I wanted to highlight two things, that one thing she shared and one thing about RFK Jr., which is important. She says Pfizer slashed its COVID clinical trial review down to 22 hours using artificial intelligence. Think about coming off what we just went through. The people who more than anyone called for this to stop, called for them to be held accountable, neither of which have happened. In fact, zero accountability, and it's increased in what they're doing. More mRNA shots, less accountability. And now adding artificial intelligence on top of what they already used last time to increase the pace. Is that what people actually called for? In fact, we're going to be an important article we're going to discuss in here. That's the point about the lies of Venezuela, but he broadens this out, or rather in El Salvador. And it's a former kind of Trump supporter dynamic. It's a conservative who used to support it, calls it out, broadening it out to just show you the kind of level of inherent dishonesty that I think is just partisans, but he's highlighting within the MAGA community. I'm still of the mind that I think most people in that community are good people who want good things, who have been tricked into thinking these things are what they want. I stand by that, because if you talk to these people, the core reason for why they believe in certain things are because they think this is going to save this country or bring back, all the things that we seem to collectively background want. The problem is the people at the top who are driving them into thinking those are the right directions don't care about any of it, at least as far as I can tell. And so it's important to highlight the things just like this. It's not that the community is all dishonest. It's that they are tricked into thinking that this is the step that they wanted, or however that plays out. And so she's, again, one of the few that I highlight as having integrity enough to, or standing by her principles enough to stand up and say, this is not okay. Whether it is left or right or Trump or Biden, clearly whoever does the wrong thing should be called out for it, right? Amazing how that has to be stated out loud. FDA turned the other cheek and said, hold my algorithm, and cranked out product review in just 6 minutes. That's where we are now, by the way. So her point, as she highlights that, I call for an immediate suspension of any regulatory authorizations or approvals that relied on AI processing data until independent review is completed. Now, we touched on this to a degree in our recent interview, which I gave you the link for. And what's interesting about it is that she wasn't talking about AI necessarily, but it's the same point, that if we're so basically the FDA, the U.S. government, they're taking the data sets that are provided and then acting like they're diving through and critical of it. And well, okay, but if you're starting with the data sets that were given to you by a company that has been exposed hundreds of times for lying for those very reasons or about those very things, isn't it possible that they lied about the data? Yeah, for crying out loud, obviously. And so the problem is that that's still happening. Even worse, it seems today. And adding AI on top of that, now they're dumping out AI processed data, acting like it's absolute. And it's no different. They just need to keep the process continues, and many people within it know it's not absolute, but they don't care. And some convince themselves that it is okay, or that it will work out for them. I don't know. I could give you plenty of reasons why I think they might ignore that problem, but it would be my opinion. Now, FDA published guidance on use of artificial intelligence to support regulatory decision-making for drug and biological products in January of 2025. Pfizer used AI during the most critical phase of their vaccine study. The final data lock and efficiency analysis was in 2020. So she's tagging Dr. McCary and the Trump administration. And the problem is that they've clearly already shown you what side they're on. And if you can't acknowledge that at this point in hopes that there's some 5D chess move going on, well, you are lost. I mean, it's not, look, tomorrow there may be new information that comes out that shows that here's why he meant to do it for here's what his secret 5D chess move meant. And here's why it all makes sense. Sure, I can at least consider that possibility. But until we get to that magical connection point, you have to acknowledge now that the actions are not what you thought would happen. The problem is that too many people are afraid to be honest about that. All this will be more important as we get to that later article, because I think it's important to connect the dots of why people fall into the traps of lying about this stuff. Or rather, lying through omission, or just not calling out the bigger people because they don't want to be called out for not being a conservative or whatever the frame is. But here, Dr. Martin McCary saying, at FDA, we take vaccine safety seriously. Just kind of rings hollow with what we're seeing, the rushing through of more artificial intelligence, rapid research, or the kind of exponential increase in mRNA platform technology. I mean, these are the people that had criticism before, but I guess it's only we don't like it when the other side does it. Sort of like when the Democrats do go, we're not going to take Donald Trump's shot, and then they all do it and say it's something new. Same thing happens in reverse, right? These people are playing you against yourselves. At least that's what I can't stop seeing. Now, one of the people that doesn't fall for it, Mary Talley Bowden says, will our pregnant Surgeon General follow CDC guidelines and inject her baby with 3 mRNA shots? Now, points about the Surgeon General aside, which we commented on yesterday, her point is simple, guys. If you don't recognize that the COVID schedule, or rather might as well be the childhood vaccine schedule, is the same thing. 3 mRNA shots for children. Is that what RFK promised? Is that what you thought Trump would do? Like, it's okay, guys. It's not okay, but it's okay if it didn't go the direction that you thought they would. Maybe they were played. Maybe they think this is better. Maybe they, all the maybe possibilities. What's important, it behooves you to stand up and say, this is not what we were promised. This is not what I agree with, at the very least. Showing other people that you have the courage, or it's okay to stand up and say these things. Because I get the sense that too many people are afraid to simply say these things. Meanwhile, I think we all generally agree with this. I mean, it's hard not to see that. The data behind the scenes shows you that everybody's not okay with, or most people are uncomfortable with this direction, even the Democrats, for crying out loud. So the idea that we can't stand up and say this is weird, that this is happening under this administration, they're out there, some of them prominent, but it's a small percentage of the people that were cheering this on for the reasons that they thought would happen that is now being proven to not be seemingly even in the cards. Last point with RFK Jr., Champagne Joshy simply says, it looks like we know who is derailing Maha. See, and I have to be honest, I don't like the framing of this, because it's what we get from a lot, which is that ultimately, this is why it's not happening, kind of a thing. Well, I get this. To me, that's more of it's very possible that this very video, which shows you that this person basically hamstrung RFK Jr., it's possible that that's the case. And also RFK Jr. is a liar. And also he doesn't care about what you think. And also these things were all lies. Like, again, my opinion. I think that there's something about this that I think that there's something more to the story other than he just doesn't believe what he always said. That's what my belief is, but that's not what I can prove. So I'm not going to always make that front and center. But when you get people to go, I know him and I don't think he wouldn't do this, so he must be being blackmailed. I hate that, because the front and center is the opinion that you think rationalize why he's not the guy that did the wrong thing. I just think that's not the way to go. Now, that's not what Josh is necessarily doing here. I'm just kind of using that to make a point. He says it looks like fair, not saying it absolutely is. We know who's derailing Maha. And that is a fair statement, because what you're going to hear is showing you that what he laid out, at the very least, gave him the ability to sort of stop what you hoped RFK would do. But again, maybe he never planned to. But it says, and specifically the mRNA issue. Those experimental injections that 70% of the world took, the ones that continue, which I always question whether that is actually the number, but that is the data that we have. The ones that continue to maim and kill people that are recommended for babies by the CDC, the current administration or the last one, or just your government, which is the real point to take from all of it. Non-partisan. But so the idea is that this is something coming out. Here's Glenn Greenwald covering this, and I'll just show you his breakdown on it. That it appears that, again, in one more of many ways, we were played. Now, what's important to take from this, guys, is let's just even say, for the sake of conversation, that RFK Jr. would have done everything he promised, and this is the reason it didn't happen. Fine. We can't prove that, but fine. Then at least use that stepping stone to call this out and say, it's not happening. The Trump administration, because of X, Y, and Z, is not delivering this. Or rather, just say the U.S. government. So it's not a partisan game, because that's what gets people to reflexively stop and say, well, I'm going to push back even though I know you're right because I'm on that side. So here's what Glenn, another one out there who seems to have enough principles to stand on what's right, whether or not it goes left and right and swings around him, showing you that this is a big deal, because it really is. And this is the way that government truly works.
Jr.'s nomination would have failed. And Bill Cassidy very openly said, if you want my vote, you need to agree to a long list of limitations on what you can do, and you will be required to meet with me regularly and to include me in decision making. And if you don't, I'm going to call you before this committee and there will be repercussions. And in order to get his vote, RFK agreed to these constraints. And here is Bill Cassidy, when announcing his decision to vote for RFK Jr., saying that he got huge, very extraordinary and unusual concessions from RFK about limitations on his power and the role that Bill Cassidy particularly would play in all HHS decision making.
Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed that he and I would have an unprecedentedly close collaborative working relationship if he is confirmed. We will meet or speak multiple times a month. This collaboration will allow us to work well together and therefore to be more effective. Mr. Kennedy has asked for my input into hiring decisions at HHS beyond Senate-confirmed positions, and he has also committed that he would work within current vaccine approval and safety monitoring systems and not establish parallel systems. If confirmed, he will maintain the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommendations without changes. CDC will not remove statements on their website pointing out that vaccines do not cause autism.
So basically going down the step list, right? Or the list of, and he will not remove this and he won't say that. Funny how this is gigantic. The reality is they hamstrung him. That's the way you say that, right? And then the question is, if you were in his shoes, would you agree to all these things? Keep listening.
Mr. Kennedy and the administration also committed that this administration will not use the subversive techniques used under the Biden administration, like sue and settle, to change policies enacted by Congress without first going through Congress. Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed to a strong role of Congress. Aside from he and I meeting regularly, he will come before the Help Committee on a quarterly basis if requested. He committed that the Help Committee chair, whether it's me or someone else, may choose a representative on any board or commission formed to review vaccine safety. If he is confirmed, HHS will provide a 30-day notice to the Help Committee if the agency seeks to make changes to any of our federal vaccine safety monitoring programs, and Help Committee will have the option to call a hearing to further review. If Mr. Kennedy is confirmed, I will use my authority as chairman of the Senate Committee with oversight of HHS to rebuff any attempt to remove the public's access to life-saving vaccines without ironclad causational scientific evidence that can be accepted and defended before the mainstream scientific community.
The mainstream scientific community. I mean, that's pretty clear, right? So you're not allowed to change things that we don't all agree we want changed.
And before Congress. These commitments and my expectation that we can have a great working relationship to make America healthy again is the basis of my support. He will be the secretary, but I believe he will also be a partner in working for this end.
Now, I find that extremely creepy, and I don't know if you noticed the graphic on the right side of the screen, which is also extremely creepy. I don't know if this is a recognizable figure, but it's like some green person with nerdy glasses and like spiked black hair circling his face, almost like he's in the middle of a black sun, hanging over a dystopian city that seems polluted or whatever. Anyway, just since it was hovering on the screen for 2 minutes, I thought I should note that. That too is creepy. That's just the...
So, now you could easily make an argument that what you were highlighting there was, working with the other side of the aisle and trying to make sense, I'm certainly possible, right? Well, all I'm highlighting is the narrative that was put forward by the people who argue that they, I'm trying to make a generalization, just people that believed that RFK Jr. was going to bring forward either MAGA or MAHA or whatever the angle they saw through him. And that ultimately what that just showed you was not that. right? That ultimately he kind of at least claimed to align himself to maintaining their kind of check and balance on the change that he told you he would bring. And if you look at what he said about mainstream science, about autism, about any number of these things, the tune has clearly changed today. For most of it anyway. I mean, when good things happen, I will point them out. Not when they speak about things happening, but when they actually come to pass, we'll call it out. We'll say, great, that's a good thing. And I think there's at least one we're going to talk about today. But sadly, it's also important to highlight the counterbalance of this. And if, pointing out, at least highlighting verbally the concern about certain seed oils and different, which we all should care about, but I haven't seen that truly ripple through the conversation just yet. That's good though. But, when you're still giving mRNA shots to children, when you're still starting a Stargate mRNA platform program, when you're still making mRNA shots for bird flu, when you're still declaring it's like, come on, guys, you got to weigh the reality of this. I want to see these positive changes like anybody does that truly wants them, but we got to be realistic. Now, outside of the health discussion, we'll get into more in the future shows. I wanted to at least give you some overview points about what's currently happening in Israel. It makes me, I'm going to soon, maybe even the next show we do, I'm going to put everything aside and just give you like a 3-hour breakdown of what's the updates on everything Israel involved, because it kills me that this becomes almost a secondary reality, because look, we all know what's happening. Like, my show is not going to change the mind of a politician. At least I wouldn't think so, because I don't believe they're honest. But maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should, maybe that is going to happen. But at the end of the day, I don't think I need to inform anybody about how many people, the murder and genocide going on. So as long as we're aware that it's still the reality, and I give you the points that's updating, my point is, if I did a long show today just about Israel, a lot of other things that are happening immediately in this country would fall by the wayside. And so it's like this balance every day. My point is that it just kills me that is just not always like the only thing everyone in the world cares about. It is so incredibly important, and it absolutely has an effect on everybody's lives, literally around the world, as far as I'm concerned. Now, that aside, I'm going to go over some points that connect and show you, even though we're not focusing on the ongoing genocide or the continual genocide in Syria or the continual occupation of Lebanon, Lebanon, as well as other places we could talk about, you can still find the point is, Israel is still a point around all of this that relates back to what is happening in this country. So it's still generally an overlapping topic. But as Dan Cohen highlights on the 7th, this is still happening. We are still watching children murdered in the streets as Israel bombs all over Gaza. So, it's graphic for those that are watching. People are hurt, and the bombings and shootings, and there's not even narratives anymore. They're not going, oh, well, Hamas was in the restaurant there. No, they just bombed the restaurant. People are sitting in the restaurant eating, a bunch of civilians. They bombed the restaurant. They bombed the school. That's all happened. And that's almost every day at this point. And you realize this is on top of places that are already bombed and destroyed that they've tried to rebuild. This is a complete desolate area at this point. Now, I'm not saying like literally ever. There's still little pockets of things that in mostly places they're trying to rebuild, guys. As Dan says, the extermination of Gaza is constant and unceasing. This is the reality of genocidal euphemisms, thinning out the population and encouraging voluntary migration. That's the reality he's saying right there, what you're looking at, that Israel leaders use, backed up by the entire U.S. government. Now, these, and a couple more points I'll make, this is why you're seeing this weird shift in the conversation. It's opportunism as far as that's my opinion. But I think we can see who these people are. You can see what they've been doing for years, well before October 7th, and ever since then have continued to completely align with, funding what they're doing. Now, all of a sudden, the argument is that Trump is going to split with Netanyahu. Why? What possibly could have happened in the last week that's worse than anything else we're talking about? It's so clear that this is about manufacturing. They've lost control. Even their own people are not okay with a lot of what's happening, so they have to reposition us. I'll go into it more, but I just want you to think about what that means. What would they need to do to get people back online to thinking that what they're doing is in the interest of you when everything they're doing is for something else? Again, that's my opinion, right? But thinking about it from that perspective, and I think a lot of Republicans are the ones calling out this weird shifting away from, if ever there, America First direction. Zachary Foster highlighting something you might not have seen, probably not, because corporate media won't be covering it. This is this is from May 8th. The chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group put out another video that is from Israeli media and reports. The said team in Israeli camp returned to the spotlight with more surveillance showing a blindfolded, shackled Palestinian detainee from Gaza being brutally raped, physically, sexually, left to feel pain, fear, and helpless. You think this is a one-off, guys? They literally debated on live television why this is supposed to be happening. I don't even want to watch this again. Guys, you want to watch this again? Please. It's so frankly obvious what they're doing, and it's being reported around the world, except not in this country, not people that don't want to see it. As Zach Foster, a PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton, points out, if the rape is caught on camera, which it is, by the way, which if you really want to watch it all, you can, and the victim is Palestinian, caught on camera, and the victim is Palestinian, the New York Times simply won't cover it. But if there are no photos, videos, or forensic evidence of the rape, no victims, but the alleged perpetrators are Palestinian and the alleged victims are Israeli, the New York Times will spend months looking for evidence without finding any, by the way, hire 2 new staff members to investigate the allegations, send them to interview the staff of every rape and trauma center in Israel, and still find no evidence. They will publish a front page lie about mass rape used as a weapon of war, which is what happened. But you have video, literally public debates on mainstream. Imagine on Fox News, they debated about whether they should rape people in the prisons. And most of them were like, absolutely, that's our right. Don't you think that would matter? Don't you think that would give you an insight into the kind of people that are leading that country? It should. Just falls by the wayside. Red Collective, I'm not familiar with, but simply pointed something out. These are just points to remind you of. We already talked about all this. You know, the Hannibal Directive. We put this out on June 18th, 2024. The undeniable reality of October 7th foreknowledge and the Hannibal Directive. This video is simply the former defense minister speaking with Israeli media. And it says, just to explain, they say, is the Hannibal Directive something you're thinking about at this time we're using? They're referencing back to October 7th. And he says, just to explain, or they say, the Hannibal Directive, here so you can see it. The Hannibal directives to kill, to shoot, to kill. Sorry, it's going fast. Where there is a vehicle containing an Israeli hostage. Okay? Watch again. You guys know this if you're watching this show. Hannibal Directive says to shoot to kill when there is a vehicle containing Israeli hostage. You know what's crazy about that? That is the reality, exactly like anybody even remotely knowledgeable about it was saying right in the beginning of this. And yet you got a waterfall of the journalists of the West coming out and acting like you don't understand. That's not the reality. Here we are with Israeli media talking to the Israeli minister, and that's exactly the way it's framed, because you know why? It's exactly the truth. Their own policy was to kill their own hostages should it could be possible that their kidnapping could be used against Israel. It's the most easy thing to prove. So again, they're clarifying that's what it is and asked, is that what happened? And here's what he says. You guys know this. This is not new. To give a timely operation instructions when everything's happening. He's trying to go, well, it was busy and crazy things were happening. Then he says, was the order given for the Hannibal Directive? I think that tactically in various places it was given. And the truth is that's even a watered down point because we know it was given in a broad sense because it's been admitted to by colonels. But the Hannibal Directive, literally Israel ordering that they should kill their own people. On October 7th, they went on to then say every one of those people that were killed by Hamas. And we're still questioning whether we're all being deceived at this point or whether these groups might not be able to infiltrate governments, and that's why we don't understand what's going on, or some people don't. Well, here's another example. Ryan Grimm, point-blank execution of a man with his hands in the air while disguised as while Israel IDF are disguised as elderly civilians. Every day this kind of stuff is happening. Yunus Tarawi is breaking this down. His information has been brought up multiple times at the international level, at the ICC, the ICJ, about investigations because he literally proves these things. He doesn't just show a video. He tracks down who's in them. He verifies where it came from, shows that they posted on their own social media, and nobody cares. Now, to be clear, I know people, I say that in frustration. I know you guys out there care. You know I care. But the problem is that I'm just trying to get people to react. Not with a dishonest tactic, but the idea is that too many people don't care. Right? So I want people to feel that, how frustrating it is that we need to recognize how important this is. A wanted Palestinian, after being shot, surrenders with his hands in the air. Now, see, of course, the people that are disgusting human beings out there, if you can even give them that, would say, well, he was an evil criminal. So assuming we take at face value what Israel says about him, criminal because he threw a rock or whatever, I don't know. The point is, regardless of the allegations, because I'm not a monster, the guy had his arms in the air waiting. Here's what happened. They shoot, hands in the air, sitting there waiting, and they open fire on him with the guy right next to him. I mean, it's just transparent. I don't think anybody, I mean, the question really becomes, is literally anybody in the world unaware of what Israel is at this point? Anybody other than people that are Zionists or governments that are overtaken by Zionists? Israel soldiers disguised as elderly civilians execute him at point blank range. That's what happened. Let's assume Israel can successfully murder its way to an expanded ethno-state with sufficiently few Palestinians left that they can be controlled indefinitely with force. Who would truly want that? At what cost to your humanity? Well, Zionists, clearly, and people overtaken by Zionism. So, even the Financial Times now comes out and says what we all know. The U.S. and European countries that tout Israel as an ally that shares their values have issued barely a word of condemnation. They should be ashamed of their silence and stop enabling Netanyahu to act with impunity. Whoa, okay. Interesting tone change. Doesn't that seem to indicate that maybe the corporate media's got a sense that they're going to shift the narrative on us? Come on, guys. I know that things like that should never prove anything to you. These are all just data points and my perspectives on them. My point is, the problem really is that people do that where they then let what they believe guide what they say they know. That's partisanship in one of the most obvious ways, where they put things in front of you and then cultivate an emotional response and get you to scream online that we know something that, the old statement, it's not what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you don't, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Mark Twain. And that is one of the most important statements of the day. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. It's everywhere today. The point is, suddenly the corporate media starts going, well, you guys should have been calling this out the whole time. So should have you. New York Times, CNN, Fox, Financial Times, all of you. But my point is, when they start shifting, that needs to at least open okay, maybe something will be coming. Why now? Why suddenly are they at least given the allowance from their editors to suddenly start calling that out? I think it's because there is a shift. Now, maybe it is a large one. Now, I want to jump into it. I'll hold back. Next segment, I'll go over why I think it very well may be the case that maybe Trump will call him out. I don't think that's the likely example, but I'll go into in a second why I think it's certainly possible. For Trump alone, by the way, like almost anybody else, I would argue that it wouldn't line up. But I can see an opening where I think Trump, of all people, his hubris might guide him to make this choice. But Times of Israel, this reports from the 8th. Trump disappointed with Netanyahu. Just like they think they're being tactful. Like, again, I know it's my opinion. I think it's being carefully laid out. But to me, it's just funny that a couple of days before, Trump's disappointed. And that's the quote, disappointed. We'll continue Middle East policy without Israel. Oh, you mean he'll continue Israel's agenda without Israel? That makes sense. Let's be clear, guys. There's no Middle East policy without Israel's direction. Every single thing that Trump or Biden were rolling out for the Middle East was exactly what Israel wanted. Not narrative, but the outcome, the action, what they fund, what they drive, what their military does. 100%. So for him to say, disappointed. Okay, then in what material way did anything change? It did not. The only thing that I notice is two things: that Israel is becoming uncomfortably aware that Netanyahu is a monster. And I mean, even the ones that are also monsters. And I mean, in the sense for things that affect them, also on a global scale. But Netanyahu has like 4 indictments. He's a criminal, even according to his own people. And so now in the world around at large recognizes that not only he is a criminal, but the Israeli government are sociopaths. How do you suddenly start being, the real point is, as the peoples of every country in the world start recognizing that and start screaming at their politicians who in many ways are bought off and controlled by Israel, at some point that has to break. I think what this is an effort to sort of shift away from that obviousness, and maybe Netanyahu will be the one that gets thrown under the bus. Wouldn't surprise me. But that does not change in any real way the Zionist agenda or Israel's controlling over the United States. So this very well could be a tactic to sidestep the most obvious problem in Zionism's direction, Netanyahu. But this feels hollow to me. And I'll show you plenty of reasons why. We also had this on the 9th. Trump ordered humanitarian aid into Gaza, quote, regardless of whether a ceasefire is reached. Oh, so kind of you, Donald Trump, seeing as how this entire time they have been, 80 plus days, they've been blocking every piece of food that, I mean, everybody's called out. Even Israeli people have called out. And yet Trump lies about it. And so that's my point. So suddenly he's saying, we're going to let aid in, even if they don't comply. Okay, then reconcile that recent statement with what he said right before that.
We're going to help the people of Gaza get some food. People are starving, and we're going to help them get some food. A lot of people are making it very, very bad. If you look, Hamas is making it impossible because they're taking everything that's brought in. But we're going to help the people of Gaza.
That's a lie, by the way. One of the most easy to prove lies in all of it. And I mean, like literally everybody involved, not just the UN, but everybody, human rights groups, Doctors Without Borders. I mean, even Israelis. The point is, you can see it. There's video of them doing this. They have not allowed it. They were praising that. Netanyahu and Gavir were screaming it this last time. We're not going to allow anything in because they're not. Okay, then let's be clear. They know that. Trump knows that, or he's the most uninformed president in history. So when he's telling you that it's Hamas stopping the food, then okay, why are you saying that we're going to let food in without a ceasefire? Doesn't that seem to directly contradict one of those narratives? Yes. So this is just the new narrative shift, guys. You think Trump can't stand back and go, wait a minute, I just said Hamas was blocking food, but now I'm going to say we're going to make sure food goes in whether or not there's a ceasefire, which would imply that you weren't letting food in. I mean, it's just dumb. Now, this is all important for the kind of overarching point that he's going to make in a second, that article about El Salvador and the general conversation of deportation. There is a shocking, I mean, let's not even say shocking. It's actually pretty common, but there's an interesting development in regard to the way that they're lying. I think he calls it multi-dimensional lying. It's an interesting way to think about it. Not just lying about what they want you to not see, but lying about everything. Some things that aren't even necessary to lie about. So it becomes so muddied that you don't even know where to look. It's almost like an Orwellian tactic, right?
Gaza, because they're being treated very badly by Hamas. Thank you very much.
Right. So Israel's narrative, this is the point. Everything Israel's always said that we all can prove is a lie. That's Trump's narrative. And so now he goes, we're not going to let it in either way. Okay. And that's Gen X girl sharing that clip, saying for 3 months, Israel's openly declared, and I mean openly, guys, like it's public headlines, openly declared a blockade of aid. And yet here's Trump saying it was Hamas. That's the point that we're going to get to. That's like blatant. Everyone will know if they're not just stupidly lying. So people either blindly trust what he says or what their party says, right? Or people that just don't care. Those are the ones that don't know this. Everyone else with any sense of any kind of investigatory, people that just look for themselves, know that's not true and must know that he knows that too. And yet half of them still decide to side with Trump. And it's the same thing with the left and right paradigm, with Biden and Obama. And it's the same thing, guys. Interesting, though. It speaks to a new level of dishonesty, a new level of sort of propaganda we're dealing with today. Now, lastly, just so you can watch, here's even Associated Press. Last week, children in Gaza are dying of starvation. And we should know this since the IPC and plenty of the rest in the past have said they're dying. Starvation, famine, a rampant emergency that's been going on for 6 months or more. Or even, I mean, really, since the first so many months of this, since they started saying people are starving because they were already food insecure before this started because they've never allowed the right of return. Never ends. It never ends. But I wanted you to see all that before we get into this overlap, because this is happening, guys. It matters. They're human lives. And of course, that's not the important part to the partisan media. Suddenly you get the reports that Donald Trump is going to break with Netanyahu. Well, I don't see any evidence to suggest that at all. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, there's evidence that suggests, like the headlines we saw, suggest it could be coming. But I mean, there's no real indication, in my opinion, that that's what's going to happen other than seeming, at least stated differences when, again, the policy doesn't actually change. So again, as usual, Alex Jones says, sources confirm, which at this point, I mean, based on people that have left Truth 3 Media, Richard Grove, David Knight, Greg Reese, on and on and on and on, they all have the same narrative, the same insight, that they at InfoWars do not check their sources. They run with whatever's there, whatever works. How many people do we need to see that? How many people need to break off from them and going, these people are crap, before we start recognizing that this is a partisan game? The point is, whatever sources you think he has seem to be wrong all the time, so maybe we shouldn't even listen to them if they exist at all. That InfoWars report, look, I'll be clear, the guy's influential. He's got lots of money. Clearly, there are people out there that would want to speak to him. The point, though, is that either they're always lying to him or using him, or he knows he's lying to you all the time, whether drones or fog or Ukraine war supposedly ended 3 months ago, right, Alex? The point is, Trump is completely down with Netanyahu, says the sources. You mean after that narrative got floated online and he said, hey, my sources said that first. Alex is right again. The same old thing is, if you predict every possibility over the week, then you're probably always going to get at least one of them right? If you predict every possibility, then you're never wrong, right? Except you're wrong all the other times. If there's 20 things you project and one of them comes true, I knew it, except the other 19 were not true. That is what we see all the time with these platforms. It's not unique to him. A lot of people do it. A lot of partisan media. The problem is, I don't think this is what's going to happen. Now, that's not to say that it may well happen. I'll get into why I think if it does, how I would see that make sense for Trump. All I'm pointing out now is exactly what David Icke is arguing as well. He says, take everything to be true the moment it's announced. No nuance, no context. Never wait and see how it pans out from here first. Always an opinion immediately, which to me, that's just partisan agendas. Never calmly wait to see why such stories have been circulated and who benefits in the context of Trump's upcoming trip to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. Obviously, $100 million from super Zionist Miriam Adelson to recognize the annexation of the West Bank at some point. Maybe. A cabinet awash with Israel firsters, people arrested, and universities defunded over Israel genocide protests. Really? I mean, so many obvious examples other than the floated idea that maybe something will happen. Removing sanctions on settlers for stealing Palestinian land and homes in the West Bank. Unlimited weapon supplies to Israel. But he's not owned by Israel. Of course not. Wait and see. We're dealing with two narcissistic psychopaths after all. I agree with him. I mean, it's very clear to me that there's a lot of interest in wanting this. But if you look, let's just even say that that's what was actually stated. That Trump actually said to some source that somehow spoke to Alex Jones that he thinks he's going to split with Netanyahu. How can you then just ignore everything else that's happened and not highlight this major overlap? I'm not even speaking about this person in particular. A lot of the conversation out there is the jump to he is going to split with them. See, we knew it. Israel last or whatever kind of the QAnon type of narrative that Israel was always going to be taken care of. It's like saying that today Trump suddenly said the shots for COVID shots are hurting people. Okay, we all know that. Does that then change the years that he's lied to people about it? No. But right now, we're not there yet. This hasn't happened yet. So my point is, 5 days ago, here's even what BBC wrote. Americans used to be steadfast in their support for Israel. Those days are gone. So it's pretty clear that anybody barely paying attention was already starting to sense that things were sort of shifting. So it's funny to jump out and be like, we knew it. We predicted the thing that hasn't even happened yet. It's a 50-50 shot at this point, right? They said it might happen. So if you jump out and say, we knew it, flip a coin. And then when it happens, you go, hey, we knew it even more so. But those of us that care about the facts will wait to see what actually happens. Those days are gone. People do not support Israel other than Zionists and people that are interested in supporting Zionism or blackmail, manipulated. No, it's not absolute. There's always a category of people out there that don't care that much, barely pay attention, only side, but at the end of the day, it's easy to look around the world and see that most people are not falling for what's happening. And this is just an article about that. The one thing I wanted to show you is at the time, Donald Trump branded his protesters radical left lunatics, and the Trump administration is now targeting for deportation hundreds of foreign students who it accuses of anti-Semitism or support for Hamas. Both of which, by the way, are not actually crimes unless you actually have material support for an organization. It says a move being vigorously challenged in courts. Okay, well, so if you're telling me that Donald Trump is now going to break with Netanyahu and the idea is that the support for Americans is drifting away, then that means that you align with the radical left lunatics then, right? I hope that makes you uncomfortable. I keep making that point lately where it's like, okay, let's recognize that you've suddenly shifted all the way back around if it's actually the case, which I don't think is actually the reality that he will split with this group. If they do, well then why were you pushing back against the radical left lunatics who were saying Israel's committing genocide? This is funny how interestingly these things shift. All it really comes to show you over time is that people who are partisan supporters will bend over backwards and do just about anything to maintain that support. Now, one thing I made a note for myself here, I think is important, is ultimately the larger picture. Supporting Netanyahu as a person, right, is not the same thing as supporting Zionism. Obviously, right? So whether or not this is a split, the point is not everyone's up in arms because Trump likes Netanyahu. It's everyone's up in arms because the U.S. government is supporting a genocide. That's what matters. So if they think that doing so will give the bone that, well, he doesn't support the genocide that he's still funding, That doesn't make sense, but maybe it'll work for some people, right? Supporting Netanyahu or even like the war on Gaza in general is not the same thing as supporting the Zionist agenda. So if Trump suddenly says, I don't think Gaza's war should continue, I'm glad he would say that if that happens. It does not change that he still clearly supports the Zionist agenda, which is taking place in Lebanon and Syria, in the United States. That's what matters. This might be another head fake, essentially, right? They support the Zionist agenda, the Greater Israel agenda, which is the Greater Israel globalist technocratic agenda, right? I mean, that's what I see this all as, and I think that's the point to focus on. Patrick Henningsen spoke up about this. Here's what his opinion was. Breaking, they're saying that President Trump is reportedly cutting contact with Netanyahu due to the meddling and attempted manipulation of the Trump administration. So interesting how these narratives have developed. This is all just like weird rumblings online, guys. What's funny to me, one argument over here is that, well, he's breaking with Netanyahu because he doesn't want to attack Iran. Like everyone's like inserting their own perspective on this or what works for their crowd. And the point is, and Patrick's just highlighting what people are saying. Because I mean, for the podcast, he says, my take, I will believe it when I see it. So we're on the same page. He goes, until then, do not hold your breath. These people lie for a living and they get off on war. Stay vigilant. Absolutely. But my point, though, one of the things he saw circulating is because they're manipulating the Trump administration. So how crazy would it be for them to split with Netanyahu because their government's meddling in our country? We'd be like, you don't say. Isn't that exactly what we were screaming that you guys called us racist for? Like, I think it's almost, I don't even know how you make sense of that, if that actually happens. So that's why, again, I don't think it's going to happen at all. It just doesn't make any sense. And you know who agrees with me? The Israeli media. This is the Jewish, news syndicate, I think. Is Trump really turning his back on Bibi in Israel? Don't bet on it. Now, what's funny about this, to me, this is the like institutional mainstream perspective, which is, you'll see what I mean. It says, and this is from yesterday, it doesn't take a degree in political science to sense an ulterior motive in recent reports about a rift between Trump and Netanyahu. The effort to promote the alleged schism isn't exactly covert, after all. So what's funny is right there, we agree, but for different reasons. But I don't want you to miss that because they don't think that should happen, they're pointing out as well that it's just an obvious thing. It's right on the surface. This clearly not covert effort to at least see the idea they're going to be having a schism. So recognize how clear that is, guys. So even if it happens, recognize they wanted us to be doing this right now. And it says, no, it emanates from two sets of extremists. Now, this is where we deviate in our opinion. Isolationists in Trump camp and the anti-Netanyahu Israelis. So in a weird way, partly agree. What's funny about this is so they're trying to frame it as a negative thing. They're trying to make it up to be a fake argument being floated by people that don't want Trump, rather than people that want Trump to be America first. Right? They're lying about this because they recognize what Israel's doing. And two, that the anti-Netanyahu Israelis who want this to happen because they don't want Netanyahu to succeed. What's funny about that is those things are clearly, if not the most large parts of the conversation, huge parts. And that's what we're talking about. The Republicans in this country that are like, this Israel's infiltrating our country. On the other side of it, you got people in Israel that are like, you're committing a genocide and we need to stop from that part of it. Other ones don't care about that, but want their people back, but still recognize Netanyahu doesn't care about him. So what's funny about it is they're pointing to the right things, but trying to act like they're lying about this because they're racists or whatever. I just think it's an interesting overlap that they just everything kind of blends together. He says these particular MAGA Republicans view anyone who supports the use of military force to defeat Iran as its proxies as a neocon warmonger. Yeah, pretty much. Because committing an illegal war for the act of Israel was a crime. But it's funny how they don't even can't even acknowledge that or care. Willing to risk American lives on behalf of the Jewish state. Right. So they're saying, you dumb MAGA Republicans lie about this because you don't agree with using military force to attack Iran for Israel. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. They thought that, like, the way they're framing it is like they're trying to make it sound like you should be ashamed of that. And then it goes on to say, anti-Semitic undertones aside. What? God, these people are so completely lost in their own broken worldview. Are you kidding me? Are you actually saying that it's anti-Semitic to say we don't want to invade a foreign country for another country just because it's Israel? Yes, that's exactly what they're saying. And it says, Israelis with separate false claims, among them that Netanyahu is prolonging the war in Gaza at the expense of the hostages, which is literally what's happening. That their own people are calling this out. The hostages' families, detainees rather. So they're really framing the two real sides as the false story and acting like this is being floated because they're all lying about it. I think they're trying to cover up that it's being floated for other reasons or that it might be happening. And it says, are happy to echo the schism narrative. Again, the real point is that the Jewish media, in this case, the Jewish National Syndicate, or specifically the Israeli media, are coming out and saying this is not true. That's the real takeaway. But I think it's interesting the way they're trying to flavor that. And it goes on to say, it preceded a Reuters dispatch citing two sources with knowledge of the matter that the United States is no longer demanding Saudi Arabia normalize ties with Israel as a condition for progress on civil nuclear cooperation talks. Oh, yeah, in case you forget, they're giving nuclear power to Saudi Arabia while screaming, which I guarantee will seek nuclear weapons, if not already, which I think is happening or already happened. Meanwhile, calling foul for anybody else doing an actual civilian nuclear program. The point, no longer demanding that they bow to Israel before you make a deal with them is somehow an indication that you're going to split ties. I think that's telling. Immediately, rumors began spreading after that simple point. Not that they said they were going to split ties, but that Trump simply said, no need to bow to Israel before you make this deal. Or rather, the administration did. And right after that, rumors started swirling around of sidelining Israel, if not totally severing ties with Netanyahu. The Israeli daily newspaper asserted sources in the president's inner circle report that he has grown increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu, and that is how it always works. This is how they apply pressure. Netanyahu with Biden or Trump has done this many times. Trump's last administration, don't forget, he called him racist like 3 different times. MAGA hats and anti-Semitism, and then Trump, like all the rest of them, would follow suit. Then they were best friends again. That's how this tends to work. So I think this is about trying to kind of give and take and push and tug and pull where they want the agenda to go. I don't take that even for a second as we're not going to go after the same agenda. Now, Yair Kozin wrote, quote, what is the reason for the change in tone and approach towards Israel by the American administration in the past week? See my point? Where is this really happening? I've heard a little bit of narrative shift, but overall, nothing is, in fact, it's worse than ever. So for them to keep seeding the idea that we're watching a big change gives me the impression that they want us to be thinking there's a big change. Just my personal opinion. Employing anonymous sources for such consequential topics is a neat trick to stir up trouble, which is what they always do. It's a form of lazy coverage that enables slant to hide in plain sight by cloaking itself in authority. Funny how we agree on the point that how you do it. They just argue for a different reason, right? But it says, on Wednesday with the Hugh Hewitt show, Trump reaffirmed his steadfast alliance with Netanyahu and expressed alarm over the surge in anti-Semitism across the United States. That was Wednesday, right? I mean, what's today? Today is Saturday. So a few days ago, Trump screamed as loud as he could on these shows like he always does. I'm kind of being facetious. The point is, the stressing it to people. Steadfast alliance with Netanyahu. And double down on the completely false story that there's a rise in anti-Semitism that we've proven is simply Palestinian support. Even Greenblatt got caught for lying about that. And it says, I think nobody's been better to Israel as a president than me, Trump says. By a factor of about 20, he reiterates. In fact, I could say maybe nobody's ever been better than me on Israel. Typical. His hubris is insane. And I am shocked to see, which I actually don't even disagree with that, but he says that about things that don't even exist. I'm the best, that nobody's ever been better than anything I've ever done on this topic. And I am shocked to see what I'm seeing. Because if you look back at the old days of the Holocaust, what does that even mean? You're seeing the same kind of thing happening now. He is just, that might as well be in a card they handed him, guys. I mean, it's insane. So that point is simply to show you that they clearly, from the Israeli side of this, don't want you to think that's coming. Now, here's what the squirrel points out. There is no Trump turn on Netanyahu, just like there wasn't a real permanent ceasefire in January, like we were all telling you. He says this is BS pretense ahead of the joint U.S.-Israeli war on Iran that is now imminent. And I agree with that. I think it's about muddying the water so we stop paying attention to a few different things that are happening and giving them the idea that somehow he's pushing back against Israel so they can always pretend like that shoe will drop eventually and will be done at the latest by the end of at the end of the year, he says. This is why you're only seeing some mild feigned anger from Zionists. It's a good point. They're usually, if Trump turned on the Zionist agenda, oh my God, you would see a waterfall of hatred and vitriol like we see in the smallest turn. It says they're pathetically trying to establish the element of surprise ahead of the launch, but you would have to be an idiot to fall for it. And I don't believe the Iranians are. So he thinks that's about just kind of trying to muddy the direction for Iran so they don't think it's coming. He says, when I said in January the Trump ceasefire was BS and that the genocide wouldn't continue, I was right. He said, and the reason I was right is because materialist analysis of Zionist hegemony dictated it, and it does with the war in Iran. He goes, if the Trump turn on Netanyahu was real, you would see the entire Zionist media and political apparatus from the New York Times to CNN, Jake Tapper, Dana Bush, AP, Reuters, Daily Wire, everyone, every GOP and every Democratic senator, yes, including Bernie Sanders, wage a total war on Trump. Jared Kushner, Ackman, all of them, but they're all quiet. And only a few are doing transparently fake pearl clutching because they know it's all BS pretense. I flatly agree with that. It's opinion, right? But I agree. I think those points are very valid. Now, we heard, this is the other part of it. So Netanyahu cutting ties, but there's also the float at the same time that he's going to declare Palestine a state, which is just, again, certainly possible. And this is where we'll get into why I think he may do this, both after we go through both of them. But I mean, it seems a hard sell. Now, remember, before that, he came out on the 6th and said, basically, I've got a really monumental, as he said, a very big announcement to make, like as big as it gets, he says. Which at first people thought that was like the trade deal thing, and then all of a sudden it was something else. But apparently it's coming, it may still be up in the air, is the argument. And I simply said, and this is my opinion anytime they do this, left and right. When they come out and say, I'm going to do the thing tomorrow and it's going to be huge, my point is always, this is how you should read that. This is exactly how I want you all to frame the announcement we will make soon. They get their talking points. They get their marching orders, right? When I do the thing, you're supposed to say this is earth-shattering, which is what they tend to do, left and right. But keeping this in mind, maybe there is a big announcement. Maybe it's going to be something about Palestine or a deal or a ceasefire. But let me explain a few different nuances to this for why I don't think that even if he does actually make sort of an announcement about that it won't really be a material change. It'll be a narrative. Now, of course, I hope I'm wrong. I mean, how amazing would it be for Donald Trump or anybody else to just flip the table? Literally what they promised that they were going to do and have completely just joined the deep state globalist technocratic agenda and rolled out the technocratic overload. But the point, if he came out and said that and declared Palestine a state and said Israel, and really, there's no way to do that without acknowledging Israel's been occupying them this entire time. And, that would change the conversation. But how would that possibly make sense? Right? So there's a few ways to look at this. Here's Shadow of Ezra. Trump is reportedly preparing to issue a declaration recognizing Palestine. Now, it's according to a Gulf diplomatic source, which, by the way, has already been watered down. The article's headline has changed. It's, interesting. But there's a few ways you could look at this, right? So let me start with the why it might make sense. Because for me, the one thing I've always noticed about this, Trump is the kind of wild card element. Even when I think he's still playing the same agenda, there's times when he's very clumsy about what he says. We're taking the oil kind of a thing. Maybe that's always what they wanted. Maybe they wanted you to know that. But I have come to feel that he is a little bit, he speaks off the cuff and he says things that maybe shouldn't be said. My point is his hubris really drives him, and I think that's how they ultimately manipulate him. So what would make sense is if now, I've talked about opportunism, right? And one of the ways that we should really be leaning into people out there that may, whether they believe it or not, be saying the thing we think is right. I think politicians just lean into where they can get the most influence. And if at that moment they feel that they can get more benefit by going against Israel and getting all the support of all the people, even though they'll get negative attacks from Israel, if they think it'll benefit them more, I think opportunists will go there. So my wonder is if Donald Trump is suddenly realizing that they've lost control, that his own support base has stopped. Many of them are uncomfortable right now. At what point is there a tipping point, right? At what point would he go, unless we're talking like Epstein blackmail, life threats to your family kind of stuff, which is certainly possible, which is one of the reasons why I think we're not going to see the change. But is it not possible that he might say, if he just is in line with the agenda for benefit, that this isn't no longer worth my time, that I will gain far more in my legacy by doing the thing that no one has done? That's enticing to him. Like, I guarantee you he's thought about that. But then he weighs all of the clear negative. Miriam Adelson influence and funding, the Zionist overlap, the infiltration of his cabinet. I mean, he's got literal biblical Zionists right in his inner circle who are like, will burn the building down if he talks about giving Palestine back their land, which they argue it never existed. Like, it's this weird overlap. But I could see a world in which he would make that choice if it became that painful for him, which I feel like we might be there. Let me be clear. I do not think that's what's going to happen, but that would make sense to me. Give it a 5%, 95% kind of thing. Like in that rare circumstance, I can see a world in which he might make that rationalization, but there'd be a lot of negative consequences there. Now, on the other side of it, I think there's 1,000 different things to highlight here, right? That doing this would counteract like every single thing they've rolled out. I mean, you realize right now, the entire argument about Palestine and Gaza and Hamas is the driving force for the immigration conversation, for why they need to get rid of the rooted around anti-Semitism. All these things are right back in line with the Israeli agenda that is basically, if we don't stop these bad guys, you'll be next, which is basically 9/11 2.0, right? It's the same kind of argument narrative anyway. And so that happening, I think, would cause his cabinet to collapse in a lot of ways. I think it would cause a lot of really negative influence. I mean, we could even be talking about attempts on his life. I mean, all sorts of different overlaps. I just don't think that's what will make sense. So a few more points to go into, but let's talk about this claim in general and show you where it comes from. So here is the first article. This is where it comes from. At least this is Jerusalem Post, one of the places that cited the anonymous source, which always, that's even the Jewish News Syndicate pointed out. That's how they manipulate you. Donald Trump to announce U.S. recognizes Palestinian state. Gulf diplomatic sources claim. It says, actually, here's what I was going to read from. This is funny. So this is the updated version. Oh, wait, is that the wrong one? Here's the updated version. So that was the original one that came out. A few hours later, they update the title. Gulf diplomatic sources debate if Trump will announce U.S. recognition. Whoa, that certainly changed rapidly. What you're going to find is this headline, this article, this screenshot is all that's being shared. So, I mean, instantaneously, you basically get the watered down point where it's like, well, they're debating if you might do something. So clearly, it doesn't seem already like it's likely, but let's go through what it says. The two main parts of that were interesting. And again, you could read through it. It basically just goes over, it's all a bunch of kind of hyperbole and, we don't know, will he do this and what will it matter? But things that stood out to me. A Gulf diplomatic source who declined to be named or disclose his position told the media line, quote, President Trump will issue a declaration regarding the state of Palestine. Okay, that could mean a lot of things, and American recognition of it. So that's the part that's okay, that might suggest recognizing Palestine. But he doesn't say that he's going to recognize Palestine. He says he'll issue a declaration regarding Palestine and recognition of it. The announcement could be, we'll never do that. The announcement could be, that's never been legitimate. Like, you see my point? So it's a weird way to frame that. But my point is, if they want you to start thinking that Trump is always secretly on the side of good when you can see the genocide, that's an easy way to trick you. And it goes, and that there will be the establishment of a Palestinian state without the presence of Hamas. Now, see, you might think those are together, but you can easily make the argument that the declaration around it could be that you will never have a state in this area, and then we will have a Palestinian state in Greenland or somewhere else in the world or whatever. So you see how easy the point is. People that are out there screaming this is happening, like the typical people we point to, because it works for Trump. We have yet to see if this is even actually valid. This could be a liar. This could be, the quote could have been fabricated by the platform. But it goes on to say, the source also added, if an announcement of American recognition of Palestine is made, so if already suggests that they're not even sure, it will be the most important declaration that will change the balance of power in the Middle East, and more countries will join the Abraham Accords. Okay, so that for me is like the obvious tell. This is what, the kind of Trump will change the world, and also they'll join Israel. That's what the Abraham Accords are. To me, that gave them away, personally, which to me suggests clearly that this is not going to be in the interest of Palestinians, if either of those things are in the conversation. Now, I want to point out that this is not a new conversation, even in the context of acknowledging the Palestinian state. From a worldwide perspective, first, it's happened more than once. I mean, here, Palestinians win de facto UN recognition, 2012. So the only real change, I guess my point is the way they try to frame it on those articles is that some kind of a worldwide, the only change is whether the U.S. government recognizes what we all know exists. I mean, even from a UN international law standpoint. But then secondarily, it's worth your time to watch this. Robert Inlakesh put out an amazing documentary called The Steal of the Century. Remember Donald Trump's deal of the century? That was his last effort to trick you. It was a lie, guys. It was literally him outlining the current Israel control of Palestine and just pretending it was a two-state solution, even though they did not get anything that a state actually gets. And Israel's control of everything. But he saved them, right? He framed that as world-shattering, changing thing, saving the world, and he really tried to force that in. His supporters claimed it changed the world. And then it fell away and it didn't happen. And you know where we are. So the point is, you got to consider whether this is another one of those things. But as I interview with Robert about his documentary, and I simply said, and normalizing an openly violent ethno-state. So watch this if you want to understand that the Abraham Accords, the deal of the century, the conversation of whether they actually care about helping the Palestinians, it's never been more clear. Now, yes, is it possible that something shifted? Is it possible that Trump got new information? Yes, and I certainly hope that's what's happening. But I'm not hopeful based on precedent, based on past action, based on the fact that these narratives are being floated by anonymous sources from people that give a tell in the way they say it, when if you're actually speaking to a source, I mean, you can get more and more abstract. We'll have to wait and see what happens. And when it does, it'll be very important to not just jump at the statement and actually look for what the material, the meat of it is. If he comes out tomorrow and says, I declare Palestine a state, is he pointing at Gaza? Is he pointing somewhere else in the world? And if he is, that's not what Palestinians want, and they have every right to not be displaced or ethnically cleansed from their territory. That's what matters. They don't want to be pushed out of their territory. So just because he declares a state of Palestine and it's not in that location is not what Palestinians want. But there will be people that act like that is the earth-shattering thing that changes the world and he's on the side of Palestinians. Not according to them. Dr. Anastasia Maria Lopez simply says, what's going on? Pointing this out. Because it is an interesting thing that's, floated and seeded in the conversation. And this is the response they were hoping for, I argue. Dr. Vladimir Yukov simply says, a damage control psyop, which is exactly how I feel about it. They've realized they've gone too far. Now, you could frame that differently. I don't think for them there is going too far. They've realized that we think that is what I would say. And people have had enough of Israel's atrocities. BS, because Trump supported Netanyahu's cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza. Gareth Ike simply says it's going to be, and this is from February 11th, but highlighting what Trump said a few months ago. Next to Rubio, it's going to be for the people of the Middle East. He means Israel. The guy is a completely effing psychopath. And what he's saying is we're going to cleanse Gaza of Palestinians. See? It's all right there for you to look at. Now, this is where it becomes even more interesting, seeing as how Huckabee, who is a biblical Zionist, is in his administration, right? He is in the administration. And so despite all of the narratives being floated by the typical grifters, Huckabee comes out and says that's nonsense. But maybe he's lying. Always possible. But it's interesting how people kind of say what they want to see, right? He says, and this is his tweet, he goes, Jerusalem Post needs better sources than this unidentified source. My 4-year-old grandson, Teddy, is more reliable. And take it from Teddy. The report is nonsense. Israel doesn't have a better friend than POTUS. Interesting. That's it. This article is simply going, nope. Trump's administration says that's not true. And I simply said, the Zionist in chief has spoken. Israel doesn't have a better friend than POTUS. Almost like they just needed the positive claim to circulate in the partisan media. And the partisan grifters, jumped up and dutifully obliged. Typical. And then, of course, speaking of dutifully obliging partisan grifters, Bennett Johnson says, share this if you believe Trump deserves the Nobel Prize after negotiating peace with Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, India, Pakistan, not starting a war with Iran. It's insane. Visiting North Korea in peace, reasserting the dominance of Western civilization. Like, think about even that last one. What are you talking about? You guys are so authoritarian while pretending to be about anything else. It's so disgustingly obvious. Reasserting the dominance of Western civilization. Guys, this is not the view of a normal, compassionate human being. The bottom line is, has he negotiated peace with Ukraine and Russia? That drone said that 3 weeks. No, that's still happening. Certainly is not happening, and there's no end to that right now. Or Israel, Hamas. Are we pretending he negotiated peace with them? Or is that just the floated narrative that you pointed to a week ago and you're not even following along, man? It's insane. India, Pakistan? No, even as somebody points out right here. Except he hasn't done any of those things, or this one said, or was it? I think I had one down here. And the bottom line was, and I agree, which is that ultimately That's not the reality, even for India, Pakistan, as that had basically his envoy might have been overlapped with that, but they was already in the process of these people are just acting like even things that actually did come to at least a ceasefire. You're pretending like he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, let alone that he even did any of those things. Like, you guys, this is what's so insane to me. I know you guys are not stupid. I know that there are far more people out there than not who are not dumb enough to just that you can look it up for yourself. You can look at reports right now of watching Israel kill people in Gaza. And are we going to pretend like he doesn't know that? Are you going to pretend like you don't? I mean, at the end of the day, you must be able to acknowledge that he either doesn't know what he's talking about or he's trying to deceive you. And yet these people still have wild influence. And I don't mean just the fake numbers you see on platforms. I mean the fact that people share and talk and reference and politicians and, it's insane. All I care about is the average person and whether you have the right information. That's what I care about. These people are deliberately trying to misinform you or have no clue what they're talking about. On that note, let's talk about this important overlap in regard to not just the right or MAGA, even though that's the framing for this, seeing as how this is Richard Hanania, I guess. And, he's somebody who, at least as the framing goes, is sort of kind of frustrated with the fact that he got tricked by the Trump administration as a conservative. So that should at least have some weight for people that are on that side. My point is, it's the same conversation for people in partisanship anywhere, which is the most obvious block that we need to call out in this country, right? That the two-party illusion is, I swear to you, the linchpin of holding this together. Now, the 5 big lies he writes about Venezuelans sent to El Salvador. You know all of this if you watch this show, but I thought it was important to go over the bullet points, but also the way he highlights some of this stuff that I think is really important. Now, let me see really quickly. Yeah, I'll keep going. So now this is important. He says, over the first few months, it's become clear on several issues that one of the things that makes the Trump movement so difficult to criticize is that it engages in multidimensional lying. Now, I am talking about specifically the politicians, the administration, and the screaming two-party politic people, the team sport politics players. I really do believe that most people involved with this are being misrepresented. It's easy to feel it's everyone because of how many fake bots and information and people that are just too stupid to see that they're wrong. I agree with that. I don't believe it's most, remember, it could be 50%, 49, 51, right? That's, that 51% don't buy it and 49 do. That's still a hell of a lot of people. Or maybe I'm wrong, but I want to make sure that's clear that it's far too easy to broad stroke an entire group of people and say that all of them are lying, dishonest manipulators, especially when you feel jaded about it because you were, got tricked yourself. It's kind of the framing here. But he says they will lie about the effects of their policies. And again, my framing is the current administration and those that are supporting it blindly. They'll lie about their policies. And here's what he means by multidimensional lying. And I think this is a really important thing to think about. They will lie about the problem they're trying to solve. So right in the beginning, not even actually being honest about what they're aiming at. They will then lie about the effects of the policies, again, even though they're lying about what they're even trying to solve. Right? It's just fascinating dynamic. They will then lie about the justification for that policy and its legal basis. They will then pick examples of the things that they've done to solve the problem that will also be lies. Now, the question is, and then he goes on to say, they will lie about how the policy is working and even when the courts have been saying about their policies. These aren't misrepresentations that leave out context. We're talking about bald-faced lies by any definition. Now, we're seeing this today, and it really has been an evolving thing. It's a partisan thing, left and right. But what's interesting is we've turned an interesting corner today, which I would argue that if, the next left administration will probably carry suit. It's an evolving thing. But what I think is fascinating is that you can see, like I said before, like I was trying to frame, it's not just like the nuance you're used to where the left and the right disagree about what we're framing, and it's like a small nuance point. We're talking about like outright complete lies about what, like we won the 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, which is just wild to me. Pretty obviously they didn't. You could read it for yourself. But it's not just even one lie, as he's highlighting. It's like, it's almost as if you're creating entire conversations that are square one lies, and then you go through the process of dealing with that lie, and then how the policies you enact about that lie, and then how those policies have affected these, and they're all lies. Why would you go through all that? I think it's a very clear effort to, one, completely people just check out. It's sort of a Brave New World, or whatever the term you think most fits. the effort to get you overwhelmed with the abstract reality of it to where you just go, okay, I'm going to seek out a Ryan or a Jones or whatever, whoever you think you can trust, and just listen to what they tell me, which I hope you guys are not doing that. I know it can be easy to think you can trust me or anybody else and just listen because you don't have time. I hope you're not doing that. I hope at the very least you can acknowledge that I could be wrong too, because that is the reality. But that's a fascinating thing to look at, because it's every conversation I see right now. There's a whole layer of it that's just lie on lie on lie. Or even another way to look at it, you've got an interesting story that comes out, and then instead of focusing on the actual forest, you're missing the forest for the trees kind of a thing, where you focus on these abstract secondary stories that then balloon into some fake narrative that's based on nothing. Meanwhile, we missed the real point. We missed the criminality that you can prove right in front of you, probably by design. Now, it says one of my failures in not seeing before the election how bad Trump would be was not grasping the extent to which moral nihilism now characterizes his movement. Now, again, I don't think it's just everyone in it. I think it's people that are being led into it, being manipulated. I believe that. But it says instead of just asserting all of this, he goes, I'm going to show you how this works in the example of Venezuelans sent to El Salvador. It's a good example that we've been calling out. You can do something very similar with Doge and other administrative initiatives. But the Venezuelan case is enough to make the general point. No one has the time to uncover and understand all of Trump's lies, or I would argue just the U.S. government's lies. The hope here is that through a deep dive into this particular issue, you can understand the failings of MAGA more generally. I'm focused on the lies told, he says, but we should not lose sight of the ultimate goal of the administration here, to lock up innocent men in labor camps. This is so self-evidently evil and wrong that there isn't much left to say. An article on why this is evil and wrong seems kind of pointless. So I focus on the lies told in the service of that goal, in the hopes that it will change how people see the administration on every other issue going forward, as well as its supporters. The fact that they lie all the time and the fact that they have evil goals are not unrelated. They're both products of a movement that is morally and ethically corrupt to its core. Now, remember, he is a conservative supporter of the Trump administration until he recognized these things. And you could also argue that that in of itself is a ploy. It's irrelevant for the point that you can prove these things for yourself. Now, in what we're going to get into next, that was his framing, his opinion. I largely agree with it, though, and it's not unique to one side or the other. And it says they lied about immigration crime. Now, this is an interesting point because it's so easy to look up. Now, yes, you could argue the statistics are slanted and lied about. But what's fascinating is that most people are not giving you another set of data. They're just going, that's a Democrat lie, and saying, we know that this is X, Y, and Z. You can, in multiple databases, I've shown you 2 of them on this show. It shows you that the claim that immigrants are all committing crime is simply not true. Now, my point was, I guarantee you there's an overlap to that, where there's a section, a percentage of them that might be committing the worst crimes. And that's fair. I don't know how you can prove that necessarily in the context of the majority. I mean, maybe you could actually, but my point is, I get that. But you have to also understand that the data shows you that most of them do not. And so what's crazy is to frame all of them as these illegal rapist, murdering traffickers, and I get caught lying about people they sent there with those claims. It begins to show you that they are lying about a lot of this. But what's interesting is that if you think about the logic of it, right? And I said last time, I work with people in the restaurant industry, a lot of people. And I know, we went out and drank and partied and hang out with people I knew for years working at these places. Now, that's just my one perspective on it. I'm sure there are nuanced levels out there. The point, though, is that in my experience, that's the way to frame it, most of these people are so afraid of getting deported or sent back that they basically they drive 10 miles under the speed limit. They try not to get caught. Now, again, there are those that don't. But in my experience, that makes sense. The logic is, why would they push that boundary? You know what I mean? It's an interesting thought. But regardless of my opinions on it, the data does show this. And he says, even before coming into office, the Trump administration lied about the existence of an immigration crime wave that needed attention. As I pointed out, the empirical evidence indicates, the link is right there for you, that if anything, migration makes natives safer. Now, you can disagree with his framing there. My point is that the data shows you that they're not all, that most of them do not commit crimes. And it says, I explained why pointing to certain subgroups or regions for which the immigrant crime narrative might be true did not absolve the campaign of the charge that they were lying about the issue. His point is, you could probably, like I said, show examples, certain pockets of areas, but the reality of the picture, they misrepresented. Now it says, number 2, they lied about Tren de Aragua's connections to Maduro. Now this is an important one. And we covered this already. Same with MS-13, by the way. You can clearly see that, for example, MS-13 started in LA, right? Tren de Aragua, turns out, is actually the opposition to Maduro, which is actually leaned into by, you guessed it, foreign entities like the U.S. government. And you can even prove, as we'll go through this year, that there's examples of them pulling punches where it matters, or Maduro, alternatively, going after them and killing them. That's not to say that there's not levels of both in both countries. I think it's just interesting how this narrative has been completely dishonestly created. And by the way, to seemingly go after mostly innocent people. And I mean people that were here legally and had no criminal record. Now it says, in order to provide a supposedly legal basis for sending Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act. This law requires that the enemy in question be a hostile nation. As Bruce Fine pointed out from the Reagan administration and plenty of others, that this is very easy to see. And that's why they did this, because they were trying to circumvent the reality that they had no evidence to present about these people, thinking they could claim this was the case, which is why they then retroactively deemed them a terrorist organization, so they would claim it met the requirements. But if we can prove, which we can, that the group is not at the behest of Maduro, and it's not a state actor, and there's no state involved, then they manufactured it lazily. And that's why they're getting called out. And that's why their only narrative is radical judges, except the fact that at least half of them have been Trump judges, especially in the Supreme Court. 6 of them are rather conservatives. Some of them have been Trump appointed, and they also say the same things. So this narrative that they're all radical activist judges it's lazy. It's not backed up by the facts. Again, to be clear, I think all of them are. Doesn't change the legal reality of how this works. It says the law requires that the enemy in question be a hostile nation. So the administration needed to declare that the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua was working with the Maduro regime. Not that they could prove that or it was even the reality, but they needed that to make their narrative work. It says on its face, this seems pretty ridiculous. Maduro decides that he will defeat the United States by sending some low-level criminals abroad to push around a few tenants in a poor apartment building in Aurora, Colorado. Remember, I broke that down at the time. Yes, there was gang activity in the area, but guys, you could still to this day prove that was not true. The framing, they took over these buildings, they're taking over the area. Even the police, even the local conservative people, like the politicians were like, that's not what's happening. Here we are. Now we see why they were doing this. And it says, as it turns out, we now know that the American intelligence agencies, with the expectation of the FBI, did not believe that the evidence supported any direct connection between Maduro regime and Tren de Aragua, while pointing to cases of the Venezuelan government even killing members of the gang, which in and of itself wouldn't prove that they don't support them, but the narrative broke down in many different ways. By late February, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence was circulating a memo to the effect, which argued that the evidence the FBI had relied on to take the opposite perspective was simply not credible, in part because it came from sources who were in legal jeopardy and had an incentive to tell the government what it wanted to hear. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And this is from the U.S. government, guys. Yeah, I mean, this is one we've talked about. Oh, I thought there was the link to this. Is spy agencies do not think Venezuelan direct gangs declassify. We've talked about the memo is the point. The links are all here for you to dive through for yourself. All this is public information. Number 3, they lied. And to be clear, we've gone over each one of these in detail in past shows. This is just to set the tone. They lied about the criminal records and gang ties of those on the flights. All right, he says, you might say the legal basis for the flights to El Salvador is absurd, but surely the administration actually used that excuse to round up real criminals, right? In a few cases, yes, but not in the vast majority of them. And we proved this as well. I think it was over 75% of them had no criminal record. And yes, some of them were here illegally, but a huge portion of those were in the process of asylum cases or in the process of seeking citizenship, which means they had the legal right to stay here while that happened, according to U.S. law. They don't care about this stuff. They've revoked them secretly and deported them on the way to their meetings. On top of that, there's plenty of people. Where was it? Here legally, and then no criminal record. But there was also American citizens that more than once have almost been sent to El Salvador. There are people that have been proven to be, the one example I think is the most startling, a teenager who was standing out front a building alongside other people, and it's not even clear whether he was with those people, and ICE came up and grabbed him. The guy says, that's not the one. The leader says, take him anyway. few days later, he's in El Salvador. No tattoos, no gang affiliation, a teenager. Simply because he had the wrong skin color and was next to people they were going for. This has become shockingly more clear every single day. We haven't even got to the argument of habeas corpus yet, where they're literally floating the idea of suspending due process, just like he did in El Salvador. I wonder why it all comes together. The point was, most of them were not even remotely criminals, and most of them were not gang members at all. And then a huge portion of them were not even here illegally. So this argument that, of course, they're all illegal aliens is just a lazy, self-serving argument. Now, of 238 men shipped to a prison camp without any kind of due process, and no, just pointing to an old document of claims is not due process. It is beginning the process of sending somebody abroad and then saying, and it could take half a second. Going through, being like, we've seen examples of this in the past where you have multiple people in one hearing. Bring them in and say, here's the evidence showing that they're here illegally. Done. That's due process. They're not doing that. Just because the government says out loud they're illegals because we can prove that many of the ones they sent are not, does not change the reality. They are required to prove these things. And my point, if we know they've already sent people who were not here illegally, then what are we even arguing about? It's insane that we keep going back and forth about this. And my point again is that there are people out there that already know that they're wrong and will die on this hill because they're defending their side, which really is just one of the most grotesque parts of this. We're talking about human lives here. And then you go, well, they were here. Nope, they weren't. No, they weren't. Round and round the logic goes. Plenty of people are being taken advantage of here just because Trump needed to give you some kind of a narrative. 238 men shipped to a prison camp without any kind of due process on the grounds that they were supposedly members of Tren de Aragua. 32 had faced serious criminal accusations or convictions somewhere in the world, while the other 206 either may have committed minor violations or had no criminal record at all, according to the search, spanned multiple countries. I mean, really, guys, if you could see right now, the evidence has been shown that most of these people were not part of the gang. And the argument they said was they're part of the gang, and now it's being proven that they are not. Well, there's where your due process comes into play. And if they had not been able to produce the evidence that proved that they were, none of this would be happening. And that's why they needed to lie about it. Now it says, how did the administration determine all these men were gang members? Apparently by looking at their tattoos, which we've already proven. I forget the name of the platform. Mother Jones, I think, did a pretty good breakdown of showing you the different information around the claims they used, the 4-point dynamic they created, because even Bukele was like, we don't want to take people who aren't criminals. And so they manufactured some point system where, guess what? If you have a bull's hat on and tattoos, those alone equal 4, which is enough to send you to a foreign country. That's it. That's their documents. You can look it up for yourself if you care, which is the point. But it says, despite the fact that experts say the Tren de Aragua does not identify members by using tattoos. Then it says the administration ended up trying to give El Salvador 6 women in one case who were sent back because there was no place for them in its prisons. In fact, Bukele was apparently uncomfortable with the lack of evidence provided on the supposed criminal records and gang ties of the men that Trump sent to him. Then it says, number 4, they lied about the need to send migrants to El Salvador. All of this brings up the question of why the Trump administration didn't just deport these Venezuelans back to their own country. Officials have claimed Maduro would not take them back. And as we now know, that was a lie. You see, all of this is built on lies that we can prove. I'll show you a clip in a second where Rubio recently reiterated that lie. No, Maduro wouldn't let us. Well, that's what the reporting was in the beginning. Turns out that's not even true. So, as we can find by their own reports, records reviewed by even the Post show that 2 deportation flights to Venezuela were already scheduled to leave that weekend, carrying dozens of alleged criminals, including at least one man Rubio is publicly accused of being a gang member. Those flights were canceled after Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this overlaps with an important conversation. It's about this. As we've already shown you, we did a show on this. There's secret deals between Bukele and Donald Trump, or rather the U.S. government, in regard to sending back people that he was seeking. In one case, I argue people that were dissidents, that he doesn't want people to hear what they have to say. Other cases, it was about people that are gang members that can prove that he made deals, his government made deals with MS-13 in regard to making it appear that there was no crime. His own government called this out. The U.S. government called this out. Treasury Department, multiple locations in the U.S. government said he is making deals with MS-13 in prison. Bukele had requested that those people be sent back to him. Beginning to make sense how all this works out? That's how authoritarians roll. So what we're seeing is the reality that they canceled those flights when I think that became understood, and they invoked the Alien Enemies Act to cover their butts so they could send them there without due process, because guess what? They're not actually what they claim. It is important to realize that, to be clear on that, by the way, the mass of them, there were people, as we've already discussed, that were part of the gang members. That's what even the New York Times and plenty of others were. Some of them were. I don't know whether all the rest of them were jammed in there to meet a quota, to hide something that they were doing. The bottom line is that this was illegal in every possible sense, whether there's no precedent to send them to any country, whether illegal or not, without the process of, in regard to so let me say that again. It's illegal. There's no precedent for sending people to a country that is not their origin, or rather to send people to foreign prisons. There's no law in the U.S. law, international law, that makes any precedent for that. It's illegal. It's easy to prove. Now, had he gone through with due process, the deportation of people that went back to their home country, like Venezuela, well, nobody would be crying foul about that. And that's the point they keep trying to force in, that somehow that people won't let us deport criminals. Nobody is saying that. I don't even see Democrats saying that. The point is that you're violating the rights of these people by not giving them the right to petition their crimes, to say, I'm not an illegal alien. I mean, guys, right this moment, it's obvious to see that if they don't have to prove that, they could just say, Brian Cristian is an illegal alien, and ship me to El Salvador before anybody could protest. Because, well, they don't have to prove it, right? Maybe they just were wrong. And if you can't piece together how obviously that makes sense, then you don't care. It is important to realize that this isn't a question, he says, about whether the administration has a right to deport people. The oft-made claim that this is the issue being another lie, or the oft-made claim that this is the issue being another lie we could list. Immigration policy is often arbitrary, and people's lives can be turned upside down at a moment when they do not have citizenship. But usually, you're just sent back home. The Trump administration took the active step of locking migrants up in a prison camp. But again, the point is the idea of saying that somehow that nobody has a right to deport people. They're still doing that right now, proving to you that they don't need this weird construct to help whatever's going on with El Salvador. So there's something illegal going on around this, and that's why this manufactured thing, and I think we can see what's happening. Frankly, my bigger picture view is this is about something else. It's about manufacturing a decline in this country, about manufacturing the justification to create the biometric surveillance network. I mean, it's multifaceted, but it's all happening. And none of it is in your interest as Americans. They lied about the legal status of Venezuelans. A MAGA might admit, a Trump supporter, that 1 and 4 of this conversation are lies, and then say, I don't care, they're here illegally. This is what keeps happening. Maybe you believe that a third world prison camp is a justified punishment for illegally crossing a border. This view, however, setting aside its repulsiveness, which I agree from a human sense, there's no logical reason to think you can send someone to a foreign prison camp for the rest of their lives to a country they've never been to because they illegally crossed the border. And realize half of this conversation, if not more, are people that were here legally. That's also part of it. And every time we bring it up, it's as if people just blah, 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 blah. Like they won't digest that part of the story. But his point is, aside the repulsiveness of that basic, being okay with that, it rests on a false premise. Reuters reviewed the circumstances of 50 Venezuelans shipped to El Salvador and found that 27 of them had active asylum claims before the courts. In other words, for the time being, they had permission to stay in the United States. The Trump administration will claim that Biden's actions were somehow illegal or illegitimate, which is what we get at the last-ditch effort, but it's a generally accepted principle of justice that people are not punished for following the law as it was understood and enforced at the time they committed an act. So the bottom line is they just stepping in and just going, never mind what Biden allowed. They're in the middle of an asylum case or citizenship, and because Biden processed it, they just revoked them and sent them out of the country. That's illegal in every possible way. And we know this if you care about the Constitution. Weirdly enough, it seems people that are professing more than anyone to care about America are the ones most actively not caring about the Constitution. Now, the last part just goes over all the stuff of Garcia, which we've covered endlessly on this show, or the idea that Trump is aggressively leading into the idea that the reason Garcia can't come back is because he's MS-13, even though of all the claims, that's the one that has been falling flat because they've got caught lying about it over and over, including the knuckle tattoos that Trump seems to still insist are actually on his hand. It's wild to me. But again, secret deals were made. This is not about freedom, democracy, or anything else. Now, remember that Bukele in El Salvador illegally took power. The election originally was riddled with all sorts of allegations of election fraud, cyber attacks, like all of the hallmarks that the U.S. government would use to criticize every other government. Then when he took power, assuming that was legitimate, he tried to run again when he wasn't supposed to. They wouldn't let that happen. So what they did was remove judges and put judges in place that would change the legal dynamic of the country. And what do you know? Now he can run again. That's why he's in power again now. Then what he did was restrict civil liberties. He removed habeas corpus. Seems like what they're floating in this country now. Why do you do it? To go after gang members. Sure sounds like the same narrative we're getting here, isn't it? Illegal gang members and immigration. We have to suspend habeas corpus. I've never been more blown away by watching people who profess to care about the Constitution rationalize suspending habeas corpus. Now, we're going to get into the constitutional reality of that. Blows my mind. Before we get there, here is what Marco Rubio said in March. Backtracks that basically admitting to you what we've always known, that the people sent to El Salvador were not entirely gang members, despite the incessant claims, even to this day, by Miller and Bondi and Trump, that they're all radical maniacs. At least they've somewhat watered it down. But in the beginning, for the most part, it was incessant, all about it. And I've heard them even recently say they're all bad people when they need to. And here's Rubio watering it down again.
Secretary Rubio, when you and President Bukele, you mentioned Tren de Aragua several times, when you and President Bukele negotiated the deal to transfer the U.S. deportees to his prison in Secot, did you discuss any provisions to ensure that individuals mistakenly identified as gang members would have access to legal recourse, or that they can secure their release if they are wrongly?
Yeah, we have that list was carefully vetted, provided to us by Homeland Security. We have confidence in it. What we negotiated is the reality that they in El Salvador comply with all the international requirements for imprisonment. So we sent them people, with a combination of people, gang members, people we knew were involved in activities that were not productive to the United States, all of them removable in terms of our laws, all of them.
I want to go back. I want to listen to that again.
Secretary Rubio, when you and President Bukele, you mentioned Tren de Aragua several times, when you and President Bukele negotiated the deal to transfer the U.S. deportees to his prison in Secot, did you discuss any provisions to ensure that individuals mistakenly identified as gang members would have access to legal recourse?
Right. So due process. The ability for them to say, I'm not a criminal. I can prove it, which none of them were afforded.
Or that they can secure their release if they are wrongly.
Yeah, we have that list was carefully vetted, provided to us by Homeland Security. We have confidence in it.
Oh, so just skip right over the question. Right. They know what they're doing. That's very clumsy. And lawyers and constitutionalists and anybody with a brain is going to recognize. The question was, are they able to petition, what's the framing? Are they able to basically say, I'm not a criminal? There's a legal framing that's the right way to say it. She asked point blank. And he says, we got a list and we trust the list. Okay. So no, your answer is no. No, they do not have a mechanism through which they can show you that they're not illegal aliens or not criminals or not whatever you're claiming, not gang members. It's such a monumental shift in this country, whether it's ever been actually cared about by the government, or they're openly showing you a precedent-changing reality where they're saying, when we want to, we can just ignore that because fill in the blank. Whether we claim it's because of a pathogen or because of immigration, right? Or because of whatever they do the next day, whatever narrative they use to justify why you should ignore your own rights.
What we negotiated is the reality that they in El Salvador comply with all the international requirements for imprisonment.
Oh, but they're not, though. Right. So literally one of the dumbest things he said, how clearly you can prove that Secot is a concentration camp, that human rights groups around the world have been calling out for years. It is a horrible place where people are put for life with no chance of, they're not even given the right time of hearing in front of that was the point. At best, they get a TV screen with 30 people in the room where they get one hearing. Most of them never leave. I don't think there's even been evidence of anybody leaving. And you're going to tell me that complies with international requirements? I mean, it's such a stupid, blatant lie. which again proves to me that they know what they're doing. They know that if this really gets clearly laid out, that they might actually be held legally accountable.
So we sent them people, it was a combination of people, gang members, people we knew were involved in activities that were not productive to the United States.
Oh, okay. You mean like protesting Israel? Writing op-eds? Yeah, just like that.
All of them removable in terms of our laws, all of them.
Nope. Literally, provably the opposite. That's what's so insane about it. Like literally easy to prove that you have people there with no criminal record that are not, and yet removable under our laws. No, you chose them either because you swept up a bunch of people without any due diligence or because Israel told you so, which we'll get to next. Betar US quite literally handpicking people to send to El Salvador. The court just found that out.
Every single one of them was someone who was removable from the United States, irrespective, and MS-13 members, many of whom are Salvadoran, that we had identified as MS-13 members that they had helped us identify as well. And that, so it was a combination of people that we sent.
Yeah.
And, we may send more.
Don't miss that. But he just made it clear Bukele did handpick them and say, I want those guys. Those are the people I want to see. And those are the ones that the article we just showed you exposed, even the U.S. government elements exposed, were because they made deals with MS-13 to lie about what was going on. And Bukele did not want those people to be coming out in court. Remember, there was the one that Pam Bondi and the rest of, the U.S. government was investigating, had a long-term investigation on, was about to bring to court. This is well before the current discussion. He's an actual MS-13 gang member, a leader that they were going to put in prison. And at the last moment, they dropped all the charges and sent him to El Salvador. Why? Because Bukele asked. Because I think when they went to court, that person was going to have a lot to say. This is where we are. She also highlights, he says, Rubio can't name a single crime committed. This one's important as well.
People, they have an obligation. If you are a country and someone is illegally in another country, you have an obligation to take those people back, whether they're criminals or not. Venezuela said they wouldn't take them back.
That's a lie. Obviously. Right? So he is reiterating the lie to keep the narrative going. So if every point you stand back and every single element of this construct has been a lie, well, now we're back to that point of the article. Multidimensional lying.
So we had to find a place to send them, especially the ones that had records or ones that we had strong suspicions and evidence that were involved in illicit activity.
Wow. Especially ones that had records and people that were suspicious of possibly, listen to that again.
Or ones that we had strong suspicions. And so we had to find a place to send them, especially the ones that had records.
Okay. We had to find a place to send them, especially the ones with records, very clearly implying that some of them did not have records. We already know that. He's being trapped by his own lazy language. Or
ones that we had strong suspicions and evidence that were involved in illicit activity.
Strong suspicion. Apparently strong suspicion of you being involved in activity is enough to send you to foreign government.
And so we had to send some to El Salvador because of that. These are some really bad people. Tren de Aragua is one of the most dangerous gangs the world has ever seen.
Okay, so now we lurch into the idea of this thing is really bad. Therefore, anybody we accuse of that thing is also bad. Unless we, even though we don't prove that. The same thing they keep doing. They go, this woman was killed by an immigrant. That has nothing to do with whether these people are guilty. But they know it'll get you emotionally outraged. Then you go, those Democrats lie about everything. They're bread and butter.
Okay, when they were held temporarily in Guantanamo while being transferred to Honduras, because that's when the Venezuelans picked some of them up, the Marines at Guantanamo said these are some of the roughest people we've ever interacted with.
God. For all we know, they just made that up. But it's not evidence of any kind, right? The idea that that's going to be, court would not say this guy claimed he thought they looked bad. Do you think that's going to carry in a court of law? That's no one has ever argued that, like, for example, with Garcia. In I'm never arguing that we know for sure that he doesn't have a record, is not a bad guy. I'm showing you the evidence that they have presented, and what we can find suggests that he is not what they're claiming he is. And on top of that, the only point is, had they given him the right to due process, you'd been able to know for sure. That's it. And they water this down into 37 different side conversations that have nothing to do with the major point because they need you emotionally outraged.
They were worse than the Al-Qaeda guys that were in their jails.
Wow.
Think about that. So
again, how disgusting it is that we can literally prove that most of them were not criminals. And that's how Marco Rubio is framing them. Whether he knows it or not. I think they do know. I think he knows what he's doing, and he's doing this like Bondi and like Leave It to make sure that they keep those people in El Salvador, despite knowing that they're not criminals. despite knowing that they were seeking the so-called American dream, like he told Venezuelans to come to the United States to do. Rubio did. So literally, going back to the last administration, you can prove that he was coaxing Venezuelans to the country and now sending them to a foreign prison. Innocent people. I mean, think about the monster that makes this person. They're all the same, in my opinion. Also, U.S. intelligence agencies contradict Trump's claim in general. Main point, declassified memo drafted by U.S. intelligence agencies. Not that we trust intelligence agencies, but just my point is that's the U.S. government. That's Trump's current government. His intelligence agencies are saying they contradict the claim that Venezuela's government controls Tren de Aragua, an argument that has been used to deport these people to El Salvador. It's all construct, guys. It's all manufactured to make these arguments. Derek Bros highlights a point about Garcia that overlaps with some important developments as well. This is an article from Courthouse News. Press pushes back against sealed records as Garcia's return hits a standstill. And this is really frustrating, seeing as how the fact is that this person has been ordered to be returned, has been proven to not be what they claim he is, with their own evidence or lack thereof, and yet they still drag their feet. And just as if they just do nothing. Realize the Supreme Court has ruled they're required to do this. Well beyond the playing with the word facilitate. They have gone back and forth, and it's very clear what's expected of them, and they're just not doing it. So as always, as with before, if Congress does not do something about that, then this is all over, guys. At least the illusion of what we pretend this country is. Press pushes back against sealed records as Abrego Garcia return hits standstill. Now it says in a public hearing nearly a month ago, U.S. District Judge Paul Zena scoffed at the White House that the White House had done nothing to free Abrego Garcia from El Salvadorian prison, despite the Supreme Court order calling for his release. Since then, movement on Abrego Garcia's case has gone dark, playing out in a series of sealed filings and hearings. A group of 14 news organizations claimed that the secrecy in the case prevented reporters from holding the administration accountable in a high-profile case that has become emblematic of President Donald Trump's second-term immigration policies. So, in case you missed that, after all this comes out and after they get caught, they're mud on their face, and even said, oops, it was a mistake, and then tried to walk that back, and then said, I can bring it back if I want to, but I'm not going to. They just went dark. They seal the filings, despite that not being discussed with the court, and most people calling it out as a problem. Quote, the case raises profound questions of separation of powers, civil liberties, foreign relations, such as cases requiring maximum transparency so that the public can participate in and serve as a check upon their government. The Wall Street Journal, ABC News, Associated Press, Bloomberg, CBS, even Fox News, all a part of that. Were among the publications named in the motion. This is a motion that is claiming that what they're doing is illegal. The Trump administration conceded that an error led to Abrego Garcia's imprisonment, but has since fought efforts to remedy that mistake. Like many other migrants on the flight, Garcia has not been charged with a crime. The White House instead advanced unproven claims that he was a gang member to justify his deportation and continued detention. In April, the Supreme Court rejected Trump's request to block Garcia's return, stating that a government needed to ensure his case was handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. When the case returns, now right there, remember, for those that are uninformed about it, it's only because the Supreme Court ruled that he was unable to be sent to El Salvador because of political persecution. That's it. They could have sent him somewhere else. They still would require to give all due process because that's the Constitution. But the problem is that on top of that, they also violated a previous Supreme Court ruling. They just don't care. All of that was to get these people in front of Bukele. When the case returned to Zenas, she appeared deeply frustrated with the Trump administration's attempt to slow walk Garcia's return. On top of mandatory daily updates, she called for an inquiry into Trump's effort to comply with the ruling. The Trump administration's attempt to escape Zenas' ire backfired when the Fourth Circuit issued a blistering ruling condemning the government's evasion of court actions. Now realize, there's Trump-appointed judges in here. There are, whether we're talking Supreme Court, where there are 6 conservative judges in general, or examples where Trump-appointed judges have sided with all of this. You can't pretend this is some radical left activism, despite that being the Johnson Jones dumb narrative online. The reality, guys, is that they're calling this stuff out and saying, you have to comply with the rulings. This is not even outside the scope of how this is supposed to go. This is the way this system works. It's amazing what they're calling. Miller's calling it a judicial coup when it seems that's exactly what he's trying to initiate. Not a judicial coup, but a coup. By trying to destroy this country for the obvious reasons of the kind of thing you would expect a Zionist to try to accomplish. But it says, since then, the government provided bare bones information on Abrego Garcia's condition, most of which was already public knowledge. The biggest update on Abrego Garcia came from a Democratic Maryland Senator, Chris Van Hollen. I find this very telling, who traveled to El Salvador. Hollen is the only one that's been allowed to see this guy. They gave him a public meeting. They even literally put out, as even Bukele was caught for doing, margaritas. Took a picture of it, and then he posted that saying, look, oh, how terrible it is. Oh, yeah, it's a concentration camp, and it's horrible. It's been proven 100 times over, but they even went that far to try to trick the people that were that stupid. The point is, why was Van Hollen even allowed to do that? Was it for the photo op alone? Well, don't forget, that's where they announced that he was sent to a new prison, which was a prison, which was very tellingly not for gang members. Like explicitly, the main point was he was sent to a prison for non-gang members. They were like very clear in the discussion. They're not allowed here if they've been accused of being a gang member. Okay, so please make sense of that for me in the conversation. That the reason this all makes sense is because we know he's MS-13. Every single day, there's more evidence showing you that they know they're lying about that. Rather, I should, again, to be clear, that the evidence they present in no way proves that, which is the same case. It's just that's the objective way to argue it. And it says, the news organizations claimed that the government began filing sealed documents, in this case, without the permission of the court. Whatever was in the government's sealed motion to delay the discovery convinced apparently Zenas and their lawyers to agree to a pause, which is interesting. We don't get to know what that is. What did they present that somehow got them to worry? Was it some kind of a threat? Was it information that changes the whole story and that's why they paused? I mean, who knows? The point is, court documents indicated that Zenas held a hearing last week before denying a second attempt for them to delay another, to pause again. So right there, that shows you that whatever they presented was not enough to keep it going. So to me, tells me a ploy. Something that got them enough to go, okay, we'll give you some time. They tried again. They said, no more. There is no transcript of the hearing, however, so it's impossible to know what actually was discussed. That's why they put this dark. Now it says this unexplained sealing of court records is especially concerning in such a closely watched case because people in an open society do not demand infallibility from their institutions, but it is difficult for them to accept what they are prohibited from observing. The point is that people make mistakes, right? But we expect that you will at least attempt to rectify those mistakes, like bringing him back. And then even if you want, deporting him to a different country that would allow him to be deported there. But of course, proving your claims of why he should be deported, which is the one thing they can't do, which is why they don't want to do all this. In an interview with ABC News, Trump said he could call government officials in El Salvador to release Garcia, but refused to do so because of his supposed connection to MS-13. Trump cited a photoshopped image of Abrego Garcia's knuckles as evidence of his membership. We know how this all goes. The obvious reality here, guys, is that from the very beginning, they've been lying. They know that. And I do question whether or not Donald Trump is aware. Like the whole thing with him's knuckles and the lie was really embarrassing for Trump. Now, it's certainly possible that he allowed himself to look that stupid for some kind of an agenda. I don't think he's even capable of that, quite frankly, but I wouldn't allow myself to know that. Certainly possible. But realize if the claim is he's a gang member, that's why it all makes sense. And his core point was that it was tattooed on his knuckles. And for those still pretending that he didn't outright say, no, not interpreted, MS-13, like really hard, you didn't even watch it or you're lying to yourself. The point is he was either lying and pretending he thought that or he actually did. And if that's what they're basing this stuff on, there's a really big problem here. Include this one for you. Now, I went over this way back on April 22nd. The unprecedented gaslighting and lies around Abrego Garcia. Now, I go through legal documents, guys. The actual, well, technically, I go over a report and cite all the legal documents because I'd already done this twice before this. But the point is, in the actual show, you can go through and you can see all of the court documents. It's right at the top, right there. Look at that. What is it? 15 court documents, and it literally cites everything we're saying, which shows you that they're lying. It shows you that the 2019 dynamic, which Trump's administration allowed him to stay after, was that they didn't have any evidence. It was a cop that was later fired for corruption who pointed to an anonymous source that nobody can verify That was the only thing they had alongside a bull's hat he was wearing. That was it. To this day, Zenas and everybody else said that's hearsay. There's no evidence there. But it was enough to carry forward 2 different deportation cases because they're going to say, well, the cop said so, so we're going to at least carry this forward. That's not the end. That's not where you go. We know. That was the carryover. That's what they point to as 2 different examples. The 2 judges ruled he was. That's a bald-faced lie, and they know it. It's so easy to prove all of this. That's why it's so alarming for some of us to think how many people might fall for this or how we might just lie because of their narrative, their agenda, their partisan side. Everything else about this that's why they've kind of sidestepped into allegations of other things that even then don't seem to really materialize because the evidence isn't there. For all I know, he's a terrible person. It doesn't change the fact that he wasn't given due process. And if they did, you would have also seen they couldn't prove these claims. Now, the overlap to this is whether Trump or the U.S. government, rather, will decide to try to make this happen for American citizens. As I said, this is March 22nd. Trump could send Americans to El Salvador. He floated more than once, 5 times now, floated the idea that Americans, criminals, could be next. Wildly unconstitutional. On April 3rd, we covered the Americans speaking out about Israel's genocide could be next. The point being, in principle, it is the same. An illegal alien, green card, visa holder, American citizen. All have constitutional rights under due process, I'll point to yet again. So if you were removed tomorrow, it'd be no different than a visa holder or an illegal alien with no due process. The principle is the exact same. It's unconstitutional the same way. I know people out there still pretend like that's not true. Yeah, you're wrong. You're a liar. No, it's true. It's the most easy part of this to prove. 4th time, Trump suggests sending Americans to foreign prison. There's been 5 of them, but this would include this one too. Now, starting here, let's not forget, guys, and this is the main point about the whole deportation thing. As I said before, if the U.S. government can accuse people of being illegal aliens and not be forced to prove that, they can do that with anybody, right? So Biden's administration could come up and say, you MAGA supporter, you're an illegal alien and send you to a foreign prison. Isn't that what you're all saying is okay because they don't have to prove it? Like the whole claim comes down to how do you know they're illegal aliens? Now, that's the point of due process. If they do have proof that they're illegal aliens, well, guess what? You're making my case for me. That's where due process comes in, where they would present that and say, this is how we know. And then they can be deported. That's how it's been going. And all these claims that Obama and Clinton, and they deported all these people. Yeah. And they were in some cases given due process and in some cases did not do that. And that is the same crime. This is the thing is they expect people to side with one left or right. The reality is they're all criminals. It's not new that Trump is doing this. It's an unprecedented fashion, but it is something that we've seen it going back through many administrations. We should call it out all these times, guys. That's the main point. But we already know that that's happening, where there's been Americans that were seconds away from being sent to El Salvador had the Supreme Court not put a pause on it. And then days later were exposed to be actual Americans, or an American that was picked up on the border of Texas. And they arrested him for 10 days. They held this guy. He's an American citizen, lives in the United States. He's been here for years. He can prove it. But they held him for 10 days. What happens if they just grabbed him on one of those ships and sent him out? That probably would have happened had there not been a pause. In this case, that's the teen I was telling you earlier. A teen that was simply out in the wrong spot. And they even said out loud, that's not the guy. And he said, take him anyway. There's witnesses. That teen is in El Salvador right now, probably will never come back. God only knows what's happening to him, seeing as how he wasn't a criminal, and you could prove that. Nobody cares in the context of the mainstream conversation. Now, Aaron Melnick, the lawyer here, says, remember how ICE agents claimed that they were looking for a different person before they smashed this guy's car window in? Remember this story? Oh, wait. Oh, I swear I downloaded that. Huh. That's Ozturk. Hold on. I want you to hear this. That's one thing I wanted you to see. I think I did that thing I said yesterday. So we talked about this. And the point here is that we already know that this was wrong. What they did was unjustified. It was for the wrong person. Okay. The point is that this is how far they're willing to go based on, you could argue that they thought they were right. I'm of the mind that they just didn't care, that it was like they feel like, like during COVID-19, nurses and different people were acting with a carte blanche. They could just do whatever. That's what you're giving these people who already have authority The belief that they're infallible, which is terrifying. So what you're going to see is one we already showed you, where what basically what's happening is they're busting in the window. Here, we get it up real quick, of a person they thought was who they were going after, or at least they just didn't care and they were going to get him and check later. Welcome to the United States 2025, guys. Where they were literally there for an asylum meeting. They were there for an asylum meeting, and this is what they do. You get the gist of it. Break the windows, smash them out, drag them out of the car. Okay. So what he says, remember how the ICE agents claimed they were looking for a different person before they smashed the guy's car windows in, and how he had asylum already? So he was here legally? Well, looks like that might not have been a ruse. ICE didn't actually pursue his case in court. They likely had nothing on him. So the point is, they did this, and now it's come to pass where they made all these allegations, and they never even charged him with anything. Here's the update. After ICE terrorized this man and his wife, heavily damaged their car, threw him in jail for weeks, based on nothing, they didn't even file a charging document. Really does seem the whole thing was an ICE screw up, and they're too afraid to admit it. This is everywhere. I mean, let's be real, guys. I don't think they're too afraid to admit it. I think that they've been given such a long leash. They're going after anybody brown the wrong moment, and they know that they have backing right now. That's terrifying, and it's so obvious. This is so far outside the realm of anything an American has ever argued we should be okay with. And here, that's too broad, I guess. That people that believe in the Constitution. I meant to make that about the current administration rather than the conservative side of this, who profess to care about the Constitution, who in many cases are blinding themselves to this. So my point in all this is, if you know this kind of thing can happen, it's exactly why we should not allow unfettered action from a government. I mean, it's the same thing. If you're out there acting like this is justified because Trump has a mandate, if this exact same thing was happening and it was Bill Clinton, would you be okay with it? You all damn well know that the answer would be no. But their answer would probably be, but Trump's not the same thing. Well, then all it comes down to is that you're okay violating rights as long as your guy's doing it. Here's Daniel McAdams. Now, I'll play this clip for you too. This is just Bill Binion from Reason saying, here is your reminder that Ramezi Ozturk was arrested and jailed for over 6 weeks because she wrote an op-ed. Now, the good news is that she has been, they ordered her to be released, and she was recently released. They're still going to try to deport her. That is happening. Just want to remind you how this went down. A bunch of unidentified police, FBI, DHS, whatever they were, never presented a warrant, never identified themselves until the guy screaming out of the window called them out, and they pulled their badges out. And they arrested her. And she was in jail for, 6 weeks because of an op-ed. It says she engaged in activities in support of the militant group Hamas. God. So writing an article that says Israel's committing genocide is all they need. You're helping Hamas by calling out their genocide. I mean, that's what they're basically doing. They don't actually say that's what the point is. But cutting to the chase, they've now been forced to try to argue this in court. Back to the argument we've been making. And guess what, guys? The evidence doesn't stand because it's ludicrous. And that's why they're so afraid to go. That's why they're trying to get rid of these people for Israel, which we'll get to next, without any due process, which means they're violating constitutional rights of Americans and people who have constitutional rights in this country for a foreign government. That's what's actually happening. Daniel McAdams says, whatever your politics is the key part of your post here. How on earth, he says, can my fellow right-wingers not understand that giving the executive branch Gestapo power will very soon come back to haunt them? Are they that stupid? Some of them, yeah. Others just don't want to, they're interested in how this benefits them now. I'm of the mind that most honest people in this country, rather just most people who are also honest, are not okay with this. Whether they choose to muzzle themselves or not, I guess pun intended, if you want to overlap it with what the left went through in COVID-19, because they think they're supposed to, because they don't want to be called out for being on the left or whatever, the only two things they think make sense in the world. Now, Prem Thacker says, the judge's straightforward words today as he ordered the release of Ozturk. There has been no evidence that has been introduced by the government other than an op-ed. Literally, his quote is, I mean, that literally is the case. Can you, do they not realize, what do they expect? Do they think, like, here's what's crazy, is they're all calling out radical judges, and then I guess leaning on the fact that they hope the judges that they like will just rule in their favor. The point is, it's not, these are judges that at least in some level recognize that this is their legacy. If they rule on these things, that will forever be on their record. And they know, at least whether they care about it or not, and I think some of them do, their only job is to uphold the Constitution. That's their only job. Court orders her to be released. She was detained by the Trump administration for 6 weeks for co-writing. The other two weren't arrested. An op-ed. You know why that happened? You know why the other two weren't arrested, ladies and gentlemen? Because Israel asked. Before we get to that, the very alarming proof that Betar U.S. is basically hand-delivering lists to the United States government who are then deporting people based on that alone, which is exactly what we were talking about before based on the evidence. Before we get there, reporter asked, does the administration have a response to the judge ordering the release of Ozturk? Guess what Leavitt said.
Does the administration have any response to the news today that a federal judge has ordered the immediate release of Ramesa Ozturk from detention, and particularly his comments that the government submitted no evidence other than an op-ed that Ozturk wrote last year?
I will have to check in with the Department of Homeland Security on that particular case, but I think our overall feeling, we've made quite clear that lower-level judges should not be dictating the foreign policy of the United States, and we absolutely believe that the President and the Department of Homeland Security are well within their legal rights to deport illegal immigrants. As for visa revocations, the Secretary of State has the right to do that as well. It is a privilege, not a right, to come to this country on a visa. But
they know their talking points, guys. That wasn't even remotely the question. Nobody anywhere is arguing that the president doesn't have the right to deport people. They act like that's the proper response to say, do you think they should get deprocessed? Well, they can deport who they want. Nobody said otherwise. It's a bait and switch or a shell game. They're trying to redirect you to the wrong answer. The bottom line is they just said there's no evidence for arresting this person, and your answer is they don't have the right to say that. Yeah, that's literally their job, is to say that was unconstitutional, and your response is that's activism? I mean, this guy makes a perfect response to this. He says, no different than having an accused person charged and tried on a criminal offense, being found not guilty by a judge, right? And then the government saying, we're going to ignore that and hold them in custody. A judge can't make policy. He's exactly right. So you understand the DOJ prosecutes a case and says, this guy committed a crime, put him in jail. And then a appeal comes through and they go, well, it turns out he's innocent. How is that any different? The judge is proving that the evidence is not, and we're not even talking about some side ruling. We're talking about them, the U.S. government, presenting its evidence to a judge, and the judge says that's not enough evidence. And her argument is judges can't dictate policy. I mean, they have completely lost the plot here. Because, again, I hate to keep making this point, but I mean, guys, how does that not show you desperation? If that's the best they can do, they know they've trapped themselves in this broken narrative, and that has to at least make you ask the question, is this for somebody else? Why would they make themselves look this stupid? Is it for Israel? Is it for El Salvador? I don't know. But damn well hope you're willing to ask that question, because this is wild. Here, it gets even crazier. Shael Ben Ephraim points out the court shows that Trump administration decides who to deport. This is his framing, but I do agree with this. Based on tweets from Betar. That is an organization labeled as a hate group, even by the ADL, guys, and which has called for the slaughter of Palestinian babies. The agenda here is to legitimize the genocide. Look at their tweet. They are basically Nazis. And I showed you this as well. And there's actually many of these where this person said, remember this went around where you had the list of all the people killed in Gaza, prove it, like the names they can prove, people that have been killed. And the first 20 pages were all under the year 1 or whatever it was. A lot of pages, insane, and a lot. And this person says, these are the names of Palestinian babies Israel killed before they reached their first birthday. Betar U.S. says, not enough. We demand blood in Gaza. Okay. That is this group as well, saying, hey, join us in Washington as we bring pagers to Norman Finkelstein. Throwing pagers, which are threats of bombs at American students in schools. Literally going around praising, saying that we want killed children in Gaza, like Randy Fine, for example. That's not like a hyperbolic statement. They're literally saying, yeah, bombs away, kill more kids. Same thing happening in Israel, by the way, which we'll go into another show. Very clearly, literally in front of the Knesset going, no, we want them to starve. We want kids to die. I'm not making that up. Here, the point is, Aaron Melnick says an update. The judge's decision on the case came out last night. And it's a doozy. It exposes how the Trump administration stripped a guy of a student visa because Betar tweeted about him. Then issued an ICE arrest warrant for him based on an outright lie from Betar in 48 hours. Now, we need to really understand how alarming this is, especially since that is exactly what happened with Khalil. That was the number one starting point. And you know what, guys? I mean, this is what's so infuriating for those of us that do this consistently and are just very, very often correct about what we put together based on the evidence and very rarely see any kind of growth and influence because of that. Now, look, I know TLAV is influential in its own right. Trust me, I get it. We have built this into something despite all of the effort, like in spite of the efforts to keep us down. 20 times harder than anybody, we all know this in this field. We do not have a fair shake in this. My point is, it's insane to me how many times we can be, and this is just, I wasn't saying that in fact, no, my point was going at the beginning of it, I considered. I pointed this out and I said, look at this. Here's Betar pointing at Khalil. That's pretty telling. I wonder whether that was the whole reason, right? And then it developed. Then we got more evidence that showed that they were literally tagging Rubio and Bondi. And I said, well, look at that. Clearly, you can see they were petitioning these people. And then that was the first person they go to. And it developed again. And the point became, it's pretty obvious Betar USA is handing lists as they were parading around online to the U.S. government. And then you can see that people on those lists are being deported. Nowhere was that story outside of a few of us that were connecting those dots. I just want to point that out, that you can go back to the beginning of the conversation and you knew this before anybody because we were showing you information that we could prove. Just want to demonstrate our value here and there for people that still need to see that. Or, the ones that will never see this because the algorithm never lets them see it. But the point is the same, that overall, we were right in pointing out that Betar US was literally handpicking people for Israel that the US government, America first, were deporting for a foreign government. Here's what the actual post said from the court. It says, during this time, a profile for petitioner appeared on the website for Canary Mission, one of the overlapping parts to the same dynamic, an organization that claims its mission is to, quote, document individuals and organizations that promote hatred of the USA. Or, as that category for them includes people that call out crimes of the government, who argue what Israel is doing as a genocide. That same thing. Hatred for Israel means pointing out their crimes, right? But hatred of the US, Israel, and Jews on North American college campuses and beyond. So an Israeli group, a Zionist group that's even called terrorist level by the ADL, is going around the U.S. and making lists of Americans and handing it to the U.S. government. How is that not alone enough to make you feel uncomfortable? And it says the profile of petitioner discusses the events of November 3rd. On October 8th, 2025, Betar Worldwide, that's this group right here. That's Betar Worldwide. An organization that claims its mission is to empower Jews to stand strong, speak out, and defend their heritage in Israel against all threats, tweeted an image from petitioner Canary message profile. Along with the image, the tweet claimed to, quote, have submitted petitioner's name for deportation. Wow. It appears that petitioner's name had, in fact, this is from the court, recently been submitted for deportation. On April 9th, just a day after the tweet, the Department Assistant Secretary of State for Visa Services sent a memo to ICE regarding revocation of that petitioner's visa, effective that same day. On April 10th, Homeland Security issued an administrative warrant for their arrest, claiming, quote, the execution of a charging document to initiate removal proceedings against the subject on a basis for arrest. The charging document, like they didn't give to the person they broke the window in. They did all of this because Betar asked. That's it. That's absolutely chilling. And he goes on to give more information. Judge Kelly found that ICE's arrest of Mr. Ersilik was intended to punish him for pro-Palestinian advocacy. Now, yes, you could argue that that kind of a perspective could be influenced by political leanings, but are we actually going to pretend that we don't know this is happening? The DHS warrant issued 48 hours after Betar's tweet said it was because he had been placed into removal proceedings. That wasn't a lie. It didn't happen until 15 days later. It says the judge found that Mr. Ehrlich was arrested and detained by ICE because of Betar's advocacy in support of deporting students who have engaged in pro-Palestinian advocacy. That's not a crime. It says respondents' pursuit of detentions seems to have been almost exclusively triggered by Betar worldwide. Insane. It says Mr. Ehrlich wanted to leave on his own after the visa revocation by flying home to Turkey. ICE wants him to be deported and sent home in handcuffs instead. See the point here? This is not about what even Trump wants or what the administration wants. This is about what Israel wants. Because the reality is, even Trump is saying, hey, self-deport, just leave the country. He goes, fine, I'll go, I'll leave, like they're calling for. And they push down. Judge Kelly found that this was clearly intended to punish him, citing Noam's support for the idea of self-deportation. That's Noam. That's part of Trump's administration. ICE has, quote, the judge says this, done nothing to disabuse the court of the most obvious conclusion. Prolonging his detention was intended to be punitive. In the name of discretion, respondents asked the court to close its eyes to reality. The guarantees of the Constitution allow no such thing. Full decision is here. As always, he'll always give you the links for you to check for yourself. Judge Kelly orders ICE to release Mr. Ehrlich so he can go home on his own without having to be detained for months by ICE and then deported back in handcuffs and shackles. How much you want to bet he gets arrested again? That's based on nothing but my instinct. Let's keep an eye on it and see what happens. Because you have to realize that these people are lunatics. And they want what they want, and they're forcing the government to get what they want. And so if the point was they want this guy to suffer, I'm willing to bet you anything they'll find another way to manufacture that to happen again and to put him through the process again and maybe make it work this time. I just need this to sink in for people. This is insane. This is the U.S. government being dictated by a foreign government. And look, that's not the only example. That's one aspect of a larger picture we've been building for a long time. It is obvious what's happening, I think. And I simply said exactly as we've been reporting since they arrested Khalil. Not because we were guessing, but because we did the research. The U.S. government is arresting people, many of them Americans, because Israel asked them to. But of course, something like that, you'd imagine we have bombshell. No. We're shockingly restricted on this platform. Like everything else. And of course, we'll include, just take a little look through their profile. These people are lunatics. I just don't know how anybody with empathy, compassion, could act like these people are not openly showing you that they're detestable, that they're willing to hurt people because they have different opinions. Yeah, look, that's actually a good point. It's changed, but 70,000 views. Now it's at 111. Look at the engagement. Guys, it shows the people don't agree with this stuff. But guess what does? The platform. The government. Now, to end with two main points that I think are very important, which I'm sure we'll reiterate as this continues, because right now this is just being floated, right? So obviously this might be more grabbing for people to want to hear about, but I put it at the end because frankly, I think it's the most, right now it's just a narrative. It could just be maybe said it just to scare people. But it's important because it could come to pass. And of course, guess what? DC Drano comes out and says, and there it is. Stephen Miller confirms President Trump is considering suspending the writ of habeas corpus. There it is. I said, there's what? The final shred of your credibility falling away? Imagine cheering on the suspension of habeas corpus, due process, while pretending to be America first. Are you pretending that suspension would be in any way constitutional? Or apply only to immigrants? I'm blown away. Now, I was going to go through this first, but I thought it was important to kind of dispel some of the usual responses before we go through this and read it directly from the Constitution, from different Supreme Court rulings. This is the kind of response that we've become accustomed to. Okay, this is seemingly constant. So this is what somebody said. Now, again, I don't know whether these are genuine or not. You can decide. but let's treat them like they're just a genuine concern. This person says, no. So again, I remember what I said. Now let's be clear first. Suspending habeas corpus, and see, that's why I was going to go through it first around, there's a precedent to Lincoln, and I'll go through why that was unconstitutional at the time. It's Congress that has the power to do that, nobody else. And so even in this clip, which I'll play first, Miller lies to you and claims that that's all we need to do is claim there's a rebellion or an invasion. No, it's Congress, not the executive branch. So he either, again, is proving his ignorance on the Constitution or is trying to deceive you. That's my point about the image today. This is a Zionist who I think is hell-bent on destroying this country. That's my personal opinion. You can decide. But the point is that there is an overlap to this that's interesting. But what we're going to hear is that this is somehow allowable, or that, that this is the suspending due process under the argument by the executive branch, which there is no context by which that is allowed. It's Congress. But in any context, doing so, an invasion or rebellion. Are we seeing either of those things? I know they've really lazily and desperately tried to paint this as an invasion. It's not. There's just no logical reality to that. So even by their own argument, it's not the reality. And yet, nonetheless, people that are claiming to be America first are pretending this is the there it is, promises kept kind of things. It's wild. So here's what Stephen had to say. And I got to be honest, man, this guy gives me the creeps. And I don't mean that in some weird partisan, I hate the other side kind of way. I mean that from like a ghoulish kind of way. This guy just exudes this kind of guy you walk by on the street and you want to, there's something weird. And I don't mean that again in a kind of like J.D. Vance is a weirdo, like this whole weird back and forth. There's something about this man that gives me the distinct feeling that he had, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the word that's not like the idea that ultimately what he's doing is not in your best interest, that he's doing it for a nefarious reason. Like, that's just my instinct, though. I'm just trying to make this be some kind of a provable point. But I feel like it's important to give you that thought for how I feel about it. When you watch the way that they conduct themselves, when there's kind of this smug, blithe disregard to things that are foundational for this country and are conditioning Americans to ignore things that have been important our entire lives, there's something really, really wrong about what this guy is doing. Let's not forget the overlap to how clearly these people are, showing you that they care more about a foreign country than they do about America. Here's what he had to say. This is one of those, by the way.
I have two quick questions. First, President Trump has talked about potentially suspending habeas corpus to take care of the illegal immigration problem. When could we see that happen, do you think?
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article III courts, that's the judicial branch, of jurisdiction over immigration cases. So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article III courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination.
It's funny how he starts with the supreme law of the land and then argues that you can somehow dictate those things by lower court rulings. Like, he's almost undermining his own point by making that case. But my point's not about any of that stuff. My point is about the main idea of suspending habeas corpus. All the rest of that is to try to insinuate or give you the impression that there's judges doing things they're not allowed to do, which is, even if you disagree with the ruling, that's not the case. What they're doing is the only thing they're supposed to do, whether or not they're guided by political leanings or not, which they all are.
On TPS, when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country.
Yeah, right. So here's what's insane about that. We're not going to get into that today, but this is the same thing. We're going to end with the point about the Afrikaners, which is the same dynamic. If you think, so if you're telling me that Biden is not allowed to give them citizenship, then Trump's not allowed to give the Afrikaner citizenship. I don't agree with either of them. Neither of them should happen. But the point is, nonetheless, as we just read through, that they did leave that administration by saying they are now here legally, whether it's for seeking citizenship or not. And for them to come back around and say, now they're all illegal because we don't like Biden, is not only childish, it's illegal. They just don't care about these things, right? So they're trying to make that into the invasion. But even if you want to claim that was all done by Biden, it's not an invasion. That's not even by the legal reality of what they're trying to claim. The idea is about an actual state actor invading this country or a rebellion from within. Now, the clear reality is I can point to one entity clearly doing both those things. They don't care about either.
When courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction. So it's not just the courts aren't just at war with the executive branch. The courts are at war, these radical rogue judges, with the legislative branch as well, too. So
it's just such a lazy art. Every time it's about the radical. Okay, what about the Trump appointed judge? What about the Supreme Court conservative judges? Like, you just can't keep making this argument. It's been roundly held up that you guys are wrong over and over about what you're doing, and it's simply unconstitutional. Now, all the rest of the nuance in between is worth considering. My point is always about the core reality of this, and all I'm talking about is whether they can suspend habeas corpus. Right? So let's get into that reality. That's the core thing he says right in the beginning.
And that, of course, is the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at.
Okay. So when he means we, he's talking about the executive branch. He's talking about government, Donald Trump's administration claiming they can suspend that, like Bukele did, because that's clearly what they emulate, or rather what they're all driving toward. That is not true. Let's go over it. Oh, that's right. So, here, I'll just do this. I'll do it last then, since that's clearly what feels like the right way to do it. I will go over some of these responses, though, that are very frustrating. The idea that it's just basically, the same old thing. That Americans don't, or rather, the idea of that. I'll go over it later, after this little segment. So the point is, citing the Constitution itself and understanding this, as Patrick here says, the president lacks the power to suspend habeas corpus under Article 2. The power is exclusive to the Congress under Article 1. And you can read this all for yourself. The first part clearly says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives, which then goes on to dictate what those things are. Okay, this is the Constitution of the United States. Secondary part, which he highlights both. Oh, actually, I'll go over some of these in a second. I have other things that stood out to me I thought were interesting. His point, though, just to make it consecutive for his points, first, which is clear, that it is Congress that has that power, not the president alone, not the executive branch alone. And that's the part I was going to go down to, Section 9, after making it clear that Congress is the one that has these powers. The privilege of writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Now, yes, that is original. So even going back to Mayberry versus Madison, the idea that if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void, the argument is still that that is the original document. That they just saw, that in their opinion, that there was a circumstance in which that might be necessary. The only time this has ever happened is under Lincoln, and I'll show you why that was unconstitutional. I mean, it's already very clear in this point. You can see right here, the points, the obvious reality is all of these powers, they then go on the list, herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. That's the point. And then goes on to say that that privilege can be suspended, not by the executive branch. That is basically, it's very clear. And he says, honestly, it's a little alarming when you post a highlighted screenshot of the Constitution and 500 people respond with wrong, I disagree, which is probably half bots, half people blinded by partisanship. He says, there are plenty of things in the Constitution that are textually unclear. The power to suspend habeas belongs to Congress is not one of them. Now, even ask Grok, which again, the main point that we're going to have an upcoming, I believe it'll be on the 15th, a IMA panel about this, is that just because AI research shows you something does not mean you should blindly trust it. But it is a useful tool in certain circumstances. The way I play it or see it is basically people that seem to think Grok is some conservative oracle, right? The Elon thing will tell you the truth. And weirdly enough, when you show it to people that think like that, they go, well, he's not always right. Okay, funny. I agree, though. You should not blindly trust it. But it's still a point to show you that they're pointing to what they claim is not the case. He says, for all the people having trouble with the plain language of the Constitution, many people in this thread have tried to get America's leading legal mind, Grok, he's joking, to tell me I'm wrong, but even that agrees with him. No, the president, Grok says, cannot unilaterally suspend habeas corpus during an invasion. Implies Congress holds that power. Very clear. It's not clear because Grok says so. It's clear because it already was. Grok is simply just acknowledging that point. So here, again, I'll go through some extra points as well. Here's the Constitution. Same point. Granted, shall be vested in Congress. And then just to jump to that part, and we'll show you the in-betweens. It says the privilege of, don't go back. There you go. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when the case is of rebellion or invasion. Now, it's worth understanding what those things mean. You can't just you can't just claim an invasion and make that make sense. Neither of those things are currently happening, at least not by the definitions we understand. Now, this has a couple of things I wanted to point out. Again, this is just the Constitution on Senate.gov. On Section 8, it says the Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Now, I just think it's interesting to think about in the context of how we're basically living under rule by dictate by executive branch, which is not the way this works. But that's the way the government is trying to convince you it should, because Trump has a mandate. And it's not about left and right. It's about trying to convince the American people and, using each party's narratives to convince you that we should be okay with it. The interesting thing is Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. And clearly the executive branch does have all sorts of influence and power over certain parts of this. But it seems that every day we're finding more and more consolidation of a lot of these things that they're claiming are just, basically everyone else is to do what the president says. They're trying to create this sort of king dynamic and claim it's democracy, as if we should even want that. And then it says to declare war, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Again, declare war. Yeah, exactly. Something that hasn't happened since World War II, even though they've been to war many times. So kind of the reverse point, but just showing you that we have very rapidly lost connection to this, even though people still want to talk about it. And again, I argue within a state of society, this is important. But if we're not really adhering to half of this, we have to realize that, I shouldn't say half, but a lot of demonstrated points where this is already being violated. It shows you that we're a long way from where we think we are. And here it says, no title of nobility. I thought this was just interesting. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States. And again, we've gone through this stuff over the years. If you haven't read through this, it's worth your time. But just these things stand out today in a new context. Shall be granted by the United States. No title of nobility. Then it says, and no person holding any office or profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept any present, any emolument, office or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state, or from them. No, I think there's a lot of examples of that happening both left and right. Of getting given a foreign, or like even Israel calling him a prophet, interestingly enough, or funding them through government apparatus, claiming it's because of something else, or a pride. I've seen this going back plenty of administrations, emoluments in general, simply meaning a salary fee or profit from employment of office. Well, there's a lot of examples of that overlap, or even just, there's a lot of weird points. And these are all just interesting things that stood out to me in the context of today. But it's worth your time to read through this and realize how many ways we just ignore a lot of this stuff. I think that was generally it. And then, of course, Lincoln. Now, again, it's not because Grok said so. This is just an easy starting point for you guys to recognize that even Grok will point out the same. And I simply said, was it unconstitutional when President Lincoln suspended habeas corpus? Now, if you already understand the reality of it, the Congress alone, and he's not Congress, then you understand why that makes sense. But it said, yes. Grok responds, yes, Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus was unconstitutional. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, allows suspension only during rebellion or invasion, but it implies Congress, not the president, has such power. Lincoln acted unilaterally, violating separation of powers. The Supreme Court later ruled against such executive overreach in Ex parte Merriman 1861. So it's probably already happened. I didn't see it yet, but if it hasn't already happened, I'm willing to bet you anything that Trump administration is going to nod to Lincoln and act like that's why it's okay if and when they do put that forward. Just the idea of floating suspension of due process. It's if I would have said this a couple weeks ago to the people telling me I was crazy for pointing out what Trump's doing is wrong, rather than the current U.S. government, and then said, well, what happens next when they say they're going to suspend it in general? You guys would have called me crazy. It's clear where this path is going. So even then, that was wrong. And that's an important thing to think about. And in case you guys are already forgot, Reno versus Flores, Supreme Court ruling, the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process. in deportation proceedings. So there's still these people that want to argue that somehow these rights don't apply to illegal aliens or visa card holders or green card holders. Yes, they do. And you can't, it's one of the most important parts of this conversation, because if we know that, well, then that means that when you're dealing with these people and not giving them their right, well, that is just as important as an American citizen in the same way. And that's the way this was written, is the point. And here's the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime. No, nor shall any person nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Any person. And this has been roundly upheld by the Supreme Court and is argued. I mean, it's everybody other than people trying to defend Donald Trump seem to be very aware of this. And then again, another Grok example, not because he said it, but because, or it said it, because we already know this. And it cites a different case. Do illegal aliens have the right to due process the same as Americans? That's important. And it says, yes, illegal aliens have the right to due process under the United States Constitution as affirmed by the Supreme Court in that's such a weird name. Zadivdas versus Davis, 2001. Reno versus Flores. I mean, there's actually many of them. All say the same thing. Now, here's an example of Melnick pointing out a powerful statement from Judge Villardo on why due process matters, even if deportation is the likely outcome of that process. Quote, how can we pride ourselves on being a nation of laws if we are not at least willing to ask before we lock you up? Do you have something to say? And here's what it says. It may be easy to say that we want non-citizens who are in this country illegally removed immediately. It may be popular to say that non-citizens who at least allegedly are members of violent gangs should be deported without a hearing. But how do we know that someone is who the arresting officers say he is? I mean, it's the most obvious point. That's what I've been saying. How do we know that a correctly identified non-citizen is a violent gang member and not a family man working hard to put food on the table and his wife and kids, or that he's even illegally here in the first place? Unless they can prove that, which is the only thing we're asking for. Not holding it up and waving it in your face, but presenting it to an authority who can say, yes, I confirm that's accurate. Yes, you can deport them, which is the only way it's ever worked. Not to say that other presidents have also violated that, because they have. Because don't forget, they're all the same thing. The left-right game is how they trap you. The point is they're all criminals. See, that's why it's so hard for so many people to make the argument against this, because when you show them that you see them all the same, and their only response is they're used to saying, well, because you're on the other side, well, they recognize, hopefully, that they're trapped in a lie, or not, but clearly, how do you know these things if they're not required to verify them? And it goes, how can anyone feel safe from being swept up and put in jail or deported simply based on being targeted by the government? More to the point, how can we pride ourselves on being a nation of laws if we're not willing to extend the most fundamental right of all? If we're not at least willing to ask before we lock you up, do you have anything to say? The answer is simple. Due process. Everyone, citizens, non-citizens, the innocent, and the guilty, is entitled to that sacred right. Yep, yet again. Cisse did not get that here. That's the person they're talking about. And for that reason, even if ICE regulations did not give him the right to an informal interview, he still would be released. And that's the point he's making here, is even if that means bringing them back to prove they should be deported and then deporting them anyway, that nobody's trying to stop the actual legal right to deport people who are here illegally, other than radical morons. And I don't think that's the majority of the conversation. Just like you have the radical people on the right saying the same thing, saying that this shouldn't matter. Those people exist, and they're not the majority. Most people are very aware that this is simply about the process there. And this is Kyle Cheney. Oh, I think I've got that right here. Simply saying, another judge has sounded the alarm on the Trump administration's alleged violations of due process in immigration proceedings. Judge Lawrence Villardo said the administration view of due process was downright frightening. And this is what Tara M. Banks had to say. Not somebody I'm familiar with, 26,000 followers, clearly a Trump supporter, says, deport that judge. Yes, let it be on the record. Okay, so just so we understand what we're talking about, we just went through the case. Okay, the discussion is not in any way radical. They're simply saying the obvious Supreme Court, backed up by precedent ruling in the past, that you can read the Constitution, that these people should get due process. Not that they shouldn't be deported, but just that if you're going to do that, that you should be required to do the most bare basic, prove your claims. Give them a right to seek, a redress of grievances, right? The basic fundamentals. And she says, deport the judge. And guys, this is not a joke. And Tom, whoever this is, says, why? For what? And who are you to say? She says, I'm American. As American, I support safe America away from radical left judges. The president was given the people mandate. You start to catch on? Your BS talk is part of the distraction. Go back to your global village, losers. This is a very clear and ongoing thing that's happening. Now, certainly possible that Tara M. Banks is a completely uninformed supporter of the current administration. It's actually alarming that people like that do exist. Now, I don't think that's the case here. Usually you can get the indication, this is just my opinion, of the bots that are running this conversation. I'm American. It says, as American, I, lowercase, support safe America with 2 spaces away from radical left judges. The president was given, with capital G, the people mandate. Okay. Maybe there's a language barrier there. Maybe this is just a lazy copied post. The bottom line is we do know that these people exist. What's so alarming is that that this is being so astroturfed and manipulated that there are good people out there that are being driven and scared into thinking that this is the right way to think about things. So you're to not even just call out, but deport an American judge, in many cases appointed by Donald Trump, because they call out your illegal actions of not giving due process, which is enshrined by the Constitution. And you say your right to do that is because you're American and support away from, do I even need to frame it? Like, this is so exhaustingly alarming that we're dealing with people like this. It is scary because again, bot or not, they do exist. And here's an example of that. Matt Gaetz says, do Democrats expect us to have 20 million trials? That number is false. First of all, the numbers that I see seemed about half, 11 million. Still, same point though. It's a lot. The answer is yes. Are you expected to give due process? Yes. Don't even finish the sentence. Yes. The answer is yes. No matter how difficult, no matter how complicated, the reality is that was the excuse given during COVID. Right? Well, it's a pathogen. We can't be expected to. Yes, you can. And that's exactly what the Republicans were saying at the time. There's no asterisk in the Constitution that says shall not be infringed except with a pandemic. Funny how that logic flies out the window when it's something that they think they want or that their people say they should. It doesn't change, guys. I get it. Just because, this is the same point. There's not an asterisk in the Constitution that says shall not be infringed unless it gets difficult, unless there's too many cases to deal with. Are we really playing? Are we pretending like these people are real and honest? I mean, or that they should be regarded with taken seriously? Wild. Martha says, not having due process is absurd. You swore an oath to the Constitution. Thank you. It's cut and dry, guys. And mostly peaceful masculinity says, what's absurd is thinking somebody who broke the law, and here we go, right? Already out of the gate. Entering the country illegally has citizen rights of due process. Well, they do, moron, and it's provable. But the point is, how do you know they're here illegally? And round we go, right? They make the case for you. I don't even think they realize it half the time. Martha says, everyone with the jurisdiction of the U.S. government is owed due process. That's true and easy to prove. Try reading the Constitution sometime, right? The people that are acting like they're supporting this and fighting for this country are the ones destroying it in these cases. And he goes, I've read it many times. Or if you do, then you have no reading comprehension or probably haven't. And he says, you're creating your own interpretation. No, it's very cut and dry with many Supreme Court rulings backing it up. But he goes, for your own purposes, assuming that's a Democrat, probably, just opinion. That's not how it works. Yes, it is. He goes, come here illegally, get deported. Okay, how do you know? Get deported without fanfare immediately. Okay, masculinity, how do you know they're here illegally? Are you just going to pretend that? Or are you going to blindly trust what the government tells you? That sure seems pretty anti-conservative, right? I mean, it's just insane that they can't put this together. Martha says, can you point to where it says that in the Constitution? He says, can you point out where it says what you're asserting? And there's where I come in, including how the Constitution covers non-citizens. By extension, do the rules of the Constitution cover everyone on the planet? Technically, yes, that is the reality of this. Humans. Any person. Now, obviously, that's not going to be applying to somebody in China in a prison. The point is, unless they're an American citizen and the government wants to get involved, which they should in the context of what's happening to you, like they haven't ever done with Israel. But the bottom line is, yes, when they wrote this, it was about inalienable rights to people. I don't even know why that's hard to wrap your mind around when we understand what that actually means. As in previous examples, even Republicans have argued the same thing. Regardless of whether that last point makes any sense to you, and it should, it's not like they're telling you that these should be expanded out to cover the world. The point is they're simply acknowledging human beings have these rights. That's what the point was. Inherent, God-given. How do we not understand what that means? You think God only gives them to Americans? I mean, it takes a special kind of willful ignorance to not acknowledge how silly it all is. But to the first point about whether it applies to non-citizens, here we go. I said, yep. So will you now block me or admit that you were wrong? And I showed him the Reno versus Flores, because easy to see. I showed him the Fifth Amendment, showing you that. And I showed him Grok because it seems like that has more influence for certain conservatives, saying yes. He says, here's your due process, pimp. Do you have documentation proving you're here illegally? No? Okay, bye. What? He goes, that's it, not complicated. So they're not even parroting the talking points properly. Do you have documentation proving you're here legally? So the argument being, I'm supposed to always be so right now that means that if you're walking down the street and you've got brown skin and you've lived in Texas for 50 years and you don't have a way to prove that, you're gone, according to this guy's logic. Think about how stupid that is. Whether it's an American citizen or people being wrongly accused, it's the same argument. That's why they are required. And we'd have to go through this 100 times over. But here's the point. As I said, yes, we're all aware of the talking points that you were instructed to blindly repeat. Now, if that's all you have, clearly this is over, since even your Grok says same as Americans. Stop being a child. And I said, open borders? Oh, that was a different, he says, pound sand, open borders, kook. Again, blindly assuming that I must be the Democrat alternative to his, what do you mean open borders? First of all, from a non-statist perspective, borders don't even come into play. My point is within the world we live in. I shouldn't even say that. Technically, that's not even accurate, but within the world we live in and we exist within this state of society, and the Constitution is in some way having an effect on holding them to account. Yes. I do not. I said that funny. I do not agree with the idea that we should who cares about it? Well, the law is there. And yes, I argue these people should be deported. I've said it 100 times over. We see the assumption is you must be on the other side. But no response is the point. That's it. Right? So the answer was yes, I guess ignore me. Block me or admit it's ongoing that this happens. Here's Stephen Miller. Michael Schreier says the Fifth Amendment says no person. And this is in response to Stephen Miller. I think this was, he simply says the right of due process, in quotes. I already covered this earlier. Why is it in quotes exactly? There's a lot of very clear insinuations here. Is to protect citizens from their government, not to protect foreign trespassers. Already wrong. Again, Stephen Miller does not dictate the Constitution perspective. The reality is you can read it from the Constitution that shows he's wrong. The reality is you can ask Grok, as I pointed out right down here, shows you're wrong. You can look at the Supreme Court rulings that shows he's wrong. You have to understand, Stephen Miller knows what he's doing. Whether that's because of the interest of the United States government for Trump or for a foreign government trying to destroy it all, you can decide. But this ghoul is a very dangerous person. And Michael rightly goes, you're wrong. It says it right there. Here's how he responds. Michael, a deportation is not a state punishment. Okay? It does deprive an alien of life, liberty, and property. And I think he meant doesn't, just for the record. It merely removes a trespasser. Again, it's the same roundabout, basically broken logic. How do you know they're a trespasser? This is why it exists. So if they accuse some person randomly walking down the street of being an illegal alien, they're required to prove that. He goes, this is a well-established legal doctrine. He's making all this up. The homeowner does not provide due process before ejecting a home invader. They love this false excuse. The same thing they tried to do around COVID-19 or on the walls. Somebody breaks in your door, are you going to kick them out? Guys, this is not the same point. Now, even if let's just even say you agree with the logic of the home discussion about whether or not I'm allowing somebody to come in my door, is irrelevant to whether the Constitution says what it says. It's irrelevant to whether the Supreme Court has many times over upheld the reality that what he's saying is wrong. So Stephen Miller, if you'd like to change that, then feel free to go after that from a legal perspective. Currently, you're either ignorant about the facts or you know you're lying about it in order to cover what you're doing. He's wrong. Simple as that. You can read it for yourself. You can look at all the same precedents we've been showing you, and all he wants you to believe is that that doesn't apply to exactly what the Supreme Court has roundly upheld that it does. Down here, he says, furthermore, the Constitution protects we the people, as in the actual what does that say? Polity and citizenry of the United States. This requires the president to exclude the entry of those who are not members of the national community and enforce. Okay. That's not what we're talking about, bud. And he knows what he's doing. We're talking about people that are here and that you're accusing of being illegal aliens. Round and round we go. This person, Mike Young, says, Stephen, let's break this down with some basic constitutional literacy. Since you seem to be struggling, the Fifth Amendment says no person can be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Not no citizen, no person. That includes undocumented immigrants, as the Supreme Court has affirmed for decades. And he's right. And he cites Reno versus Flores. Justice Scalia, as I pointed out, a conservative, hardly a bleeding heart liberal, wrote that aliens are entitled to due process in deportation proceedings. And guess what? Deportation often starts with detention, which is a textbook deprivation of liberty. The court, and this is the other one we just talked about, Zadvidas versus Davis, made that crystal clear. Your claim that deportation merely removes a trespasser ignores the messy reality, detention, family separation, and sometimes life-threatening returns. Now, again, I feel like that pulled it to a wrong point. The reality is your claim that they remove the trespasser rests on the idea that you have to first prove they're a trespasser. It's very basic. But he goes, like Garcia and the deportation to a foreign prison, Supreme Court had to step in because due process was violated. They try to make it about stopping people being deported. It's simply not true. If they have to lie from the base of the conversation, then they have nothing. So he goes, your well-established legal doctrine is about as real as a unicorn. Maybe stick to policy rants and leave the Constitution to people who've read it. You know, not Zionists trying to sabotage it. And he goes, oh, and that homeowner analogy, it's a swing and a miss. I agree. A homeowner isn't the government. Stephen, the Fifth Amendment constrains state action, not private citizens kicking out uninvited guests. Deportation is a government act, complete with badges, detention centers, and life-altering consequences. Comparing it to a private eviction isn't just legally wrong, it's intellectually dishonest. And that's the case here. The Constitution isn't a choose-your-own-adventure book. I love that reference, where you get to rewrite the rules when they don't suit your agenda. If you're going to throw around terms like trespasser, let's get historical. The Pilgrims were undocumented too. Should we have deported them? No. Then maybe stop using dehumanizing labels to dodge the law. The framers wrote person for a reason, because rights don't apply stop at the border. Stop reading the document you claim to defend, or try reading the document. Now, whether you agree with the Pilgrim point or any of these references that get used by partisans, the facts are undeniable. So it is infuriating that we keep having to bump up against people who either don't know what they're talking about or are lying for obvious reasons like this. So Stephen Miller, again, comes out because this is a very clear agenda. Like Elon Levy and Israel, like these people have their mandate is to force in this square peg in the round hole. Stephen Miller says, the correct process for illegal aliens. Are you here illegally? Deport. What's so lazy and funny about it at the same time. Okay. So here you are going, are you here illegally? Explain for me, Stephen, how you have to ask somebody if you're claiming you have evidence about that. What if they say no, stupid? Deport. Because you already claim you know. And you basically prove our point. What he does, I swear to you, applies to like below the lowest common denominator, like the dumbest of the dumb, the people that are just want to agree because it's that agenda. What he's doing is actually hurting anybody with the smallest amount of intellect. It's like, that's just a dumb argument. And speaking of that, here's Sons of Liberty saying, anyone else find it comical that they're saying Trump is illegally deporting the illegals? Yeah, clearly that miss a whole hell of a lot of that doesn't miss nuance. That misses the conversation. Like the people who were not illegally here or the people that were sent who were, every point we've already made 45 times over, but he's got a funny meme, so he must know what he's talking about. Or Patrick Giacomo rightly saying, so if it's so easy, why are you using the Alien Enemies Act? Right, exactly. Because they did that to try to circumvent the part they claim is easy, which was presenting evidence that they don't want to do. And even this is blowing up in their face, so they're trying to revert back to the original, which shows you they didn't need that in the first place, other than to hide what they did with El Salvador. Mike Young also comes in and says, Stephen, I forgot the Constitution comes with an ignore me button. Newsflash, even illegal aliens get due process. Fifth Amendment, buddy. Look it up, or is reading too elite for you now? Frank says, deportation orders are the due process. Simple, clear, and constitution. Nope. Dumb, 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 dumb. Everywhere. And some of these people are real, guys. The idea that somehow a government writing on a piece of paper that you're here illegally is your process. Do you really believe that? Or are you, I mean, that's terrifying that people can actually believe that. Here's another one. In regard to Mike's comment about reading the Fifth Amendment, Deep South Judy says the Constitution is for U.S. citizens, period. And you're wrong. Nowhere in our Constitution, and you're wrong, says it's just the same old thing. And I said, okay, when you realize you're wrong, will you A, block me, B, move the goalpost, or C, ignore me entirely? Answer was C, apparently. Chris chimed in and said, this is a deceptive post, as the due process, in quotes, is the immigration courts, which are not the same. You're wrong, man. You're wrong. And I said, incorrect. Same thing. Now, again, pointing to Grok is just because that's the easiest as you're going through all this, because people can look at it, they can look. And on top of that, it does have links in there. The point is, that's not the only reason I'm saying that. Despite the people that, anyway, it's ongoing. This keeps happening. Now, this is what Fox News said. The dumbing down of this conversation has gotten insane. And if we can't see by now the CNN, Fox News, like they are like the sideshow of it all. Like they are the most uninformed in the conversation. I genuinely think half the time that they know what's going on. Here is what even Fox News had to say. Now, first of all, the article from Zero Hedge says, White House Chief of Staff says, due process for deporting illegals in 4 words. Like they're thinking they're so clever about all this. And this is Steve Watson, of course. White House Deputy Chief of Staff. It's not complicated. And that's what they're claiming is his, intelligent post. And then a bunch of uninformed people go, yeah, exactly. That's what I think. And then here's what Fox News said. It's hard to take people in good faith when they're talking about due process and the rule of law when they didn't care at all about due process and rule of law when the border was completely open to bring in tens of millions of legal. Oh, okay. So your argument is the other side didn't care when it was broken. So why should we? Are we in kindergarten? Or is this actually real life? Are these people on Fox News arguing point blank that they didn't care, so we don't have to care? This can't be real. This influences a lot of people. That's really what her argument was. So you're just as bad as them? Okay. But the point is overall, yes, both sides have violated the Constitution. Yes, nobody's disagreeing with that who has any brain cells. The problem is that you guys frame every conversation as in we're fighting the people in Congress on the other side of the aisle. None of you guys care about what's going on. But as she goes on to say, that's why there's this nationwide injunction case before the Supreme Court, and it's so important. She goes on to say, you had an election. Donald Trump was very clear that he wanted to shut down the border and he wanted to deport people who were here illegally, and people voted for that. Oh, here's the mandate argument. Everyone's got their same old talking points. Yes, some people voted for that. That's not even remotely the same as saying you can violate, suspend habeas corpus, deport American citizens, remove people who are here legally. Deportation was always part of the conversation, guys. Look, what are these weird circulating videos? Are people going, here's Obama and Clinton saying we should deport people. Here's Clinton. Gee, what changed? Elon Musk shared some very uninformed young girl saying that clearly just woke up today and thought she cared about politics. The crazy part about it is there's been deportation arguments going back a long way. It's not about whether or not they can do it. All sides use these things for their work. This is about whether they can prove what you're doing. This is a step in the direction of what they've always been trying to accomplish. Slowly removing your belief that you have any ability to stop whatever they say they should be doing. Constitution, whatever, it doesn't matter. They'll come in and say, we don't like what you're doing today. We will shut you down. We're going to send you over here. We can do whatever we want as long as we claim you're the bad guy. Of course, it depends on what side's in power, right? Really, it's just your government using that illusion against you. She goes on to say, and now you have all these rogue lower level judges, ignoring for the moment the 6 conservative judges in the Supreme Court, the many different Trump appointed judges in middle and lower courts who have all argued the same. Yeah, but they don't let the facts get in the way of your narrative there, lady. She goes, now we see all these lower rogue judges, frankly, embarrassing the Supreme Court. You mean the Supreme Court that also ruled in the same way? Is she dumb and uninformed? A liar? I don't know. With these temporary restraining orders and nationwide injunctions where they're saying, we don't care who won the election, has nothing to do with this. Winning the election is not a carte blanche to do whatever you want that day. And she goes, we're going to pretend that Joe Biden is still president or that Kamala Harris won the presidency. What really scares me is that these people this is the conversation. Now, I'm of the mind that most Americans are not this dumb. I think this has gone in a very dangerous direction where a lot of us are feeling ostracized by how crazy, like just ignorant this is. But these people think they're the top of the top at this point, and they're arguing some of the most surface level, uninformed narratives you could possibly imagine. Suddenly, she wants you to think that because so by that logic, wouldn't Biden have been able to do whatever he wanted? But you guys tell you keep saying his immigration things were illegal. Well, by your logic, it shouldn't have mattered because they voted for him, so he can do what he wants, right? Insane. And of course, speaking of ignorance, here's Cat Turd saying, when 50 illegals were sent to Martha's Vineyard, we saw exactly how leftist elitists treated illegals when they were placed in their neighborhoods. I've made points about this many times, as you remember. They called the National Guard and had them immediately shipped the hell out. So you liberals can save your virtue signaling and shove your fake outrage where the sun don't shine. Of course, as if there's not others that aren't left and right who also have a problem with what's going on, right? The only way they can apply what they do is by aiming at one side or the other. It's the only way their world exists. But there's 2 points to make here. Yes, that was disgusting. The people that put them there and the people that moved them. Both sides playing a game with people's lives were disgusting, as I've said many times. Be clear, because, and I'll go through this and even what Grok says and what DeSantis had said, the argument is that they deported them, even though that's not true. He doesn't say deport, but my opinion is that he very clearly insinuated that what they did was deport them, or at the very least, get them out of Martha's Vineyard, which is also not true for all of them. So I just wanted to highlight this, that my point first was I was just saying, all of them are wrong. Left and right, the idea that any of them are doing this are they're all, I don't think any of these people care about half the things they profess to care about. So if your argument is they did it first and you didn't care then, you're Netanyahu in the genocide. Well, you didn't care in Iraq when they were yeah, we did though. So it's not a fair argument. And even if we didn't, your argument is I can commit genocide too, or I can violate the Constitution too. How are we pretending these people have any influence, or rather, should have any? So my point, I said, incorrect. But clearly the facts are an afterthought for you. And here's what Grok had to say. I said, were the 50 illegal immigrants sent to Martha's Vineyard later deported? And I says, no. The roughly 50 migrants sent to Martha's Vineyard by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in September 2022 were not deported. They were relocated to a temporary shelter at Joint Base Cape Cod in Massachusetts within a few days, where they received humanitarian support. So first and foremost, and it's not about a left and right thing, to be clear. My point is, if his argument is, look at what they did to stop with your virtue signaling like you care about these people. Well, if you're going to try to compare right now what's going on from this administration versus what they did here, you're losing that argument. Okay. It's very stark differences to how they handled illegal immigrants. But that's expected with the way their at least professed perspectives are. But it goes, most of these migrants, primarily from Venezuela, have remained in the United States, with many pursuing asylum claims. So given due process, what do you know? And applying for U visas and potential victims of crime due to circumstances. So going through the process, which is what typically happens when people are allowed to go through the process. And it says attorneys and organizations such as Lawyers for Civil Rights, ACLU, have confirmed that none of them were known to be deported. Some have settled in Massachusetts, including a few who actually returned to Martha's Vineyard. So even that point is actually incorrect as well, while others moved to places like New York and so on. But it says claims of deportation, including by DeSantis, have been rated false and aren't true. So that is what they're pointing to. The argument is, well, look at what they did, and they're the same. So again, these childish argument that because they did it, we're allowed to do it. Insane. But that's the partisan media for you. As Rob Dahl points out, every election, guys, every single election is the same story. People without structured analysis, education, get emotionally charged to vote against their own interests. Only too late do they see that they have been, only too late do they see they've been had. Wait, I didn't vote for this, they shriek. But 8 years later, they forget, fear, and repeat. Patriot Voice, pointing out something we've talked about recently. ICE can now enter your home without a warrant, right? This was April 26th. ICE can now enter your home without a warrant. Look for migrants. We talked about this as well. Yeah, an American home with the allegation that we think somebody's in there, which has already happened, and burst your door down. Oops, we made a mistake. Oh yeah, who cares about your constitutional rights? People like Cat Turd and the rest are acting like this makes sense. because they don't care about your rights. They care about the agenda, their team sport politics. Every single time. All they need is for you to act against your interests, guys. It's never stopping. And then this is one of the points I was going to show you in the beginning. So this Zionist here is telling you that we might suspend habeas corpus. That should be clearly the red line for people that profess to believe in the Constitution. Mikhail here says, I don't understand, Ryan. Are you for unlimited illegal migration? You see where this guy, that's like, what? Why would you blind? Because there's two sides. For some people, there are only two arguments here. He says, what if people start coming into your house? And, oh, well, gee, we've heard that argument before, and invite some people. Would you be for that? I said, why would you assume that? Start by not assuming. Then just address what I actually said. Feel free to watch the show where I regularly address the nuance engineered off this platform. If one commits a crime, charge them for it, which requires evidence. Pretty damn simple. That's it. You could tack on all sorts of, well, if that's the case, then this will get more difficult. I don't care. We can have the conversation about it. The point is, all I'm highlighting is that they're violating what we should hold sacred, or what you, in other cases, argue is absolute unless it comes up against your team's narrative. This one's more important. The Appalachian American said, TLAV, I'm with you 95% on issues, maybe more. But unfettered, massive illegal immigration, again, which I'm arguing for, in the tens of millions never crossed the founding fathers' minds. Now, I don't know why. How do you know that? How do you possibly pretend you know that? That is a partisan narrative. Now, certainly a logical thing to consider that things have shifted to a degree, but let's remember, that's the same argument the government makes about the Second Amendment. Well, things they never imagined it to be this kind of weapons. That's why this is this is something that the way it was written is clearly, it applies forever. It is principles. It is not about if this gun exists or if this many people come in. It's a principle that is easy to hold up if you simply remain steadfast in your principles. Yeah, it could be difficult. Yeah, things that matter usually are. So first point, crossing the founding fathers' mind is a cop-out. And that's what's used by the government to get you to convince yourselves that somehow we shouldn't, it's funny how shall not be infringed, inalienable, when it makes the right case can be like, well, except for this one. These people were moments ago making the same argument during COVID-19. Well, I'll read my response about how that should apply. But it goes on to say, barring true immigrants trying to escape their country for safety reasons, so now you carve out a caveat within it anyway? And he goes, about 1.6%. Hardly. I don't know where that number comes from. There is a massive amount of immigration that are people, or at least claiming to be, by the way. And I do agree there are people that abuse that. Doesn't change the legal reality of it. Or there are people that are fleeing violence in Venezuela caused by the U.S. government, fleeing Syria, Gaza, wherever else, because of foreign policy. So it's way more than that. So barring those people, he says, do we need an amendment discouraging illegal immigration? I don't even know what that means. Realize it repugnant to the Constitution, null and void. So if you're going to try to add an amendment on, if it's in anywhere repugnant to the original Constitution, it's not legal. But if you're going to write an amendment that discourages illegal immigration, we already have that. There's already a law exists that says you'll go to jail. It's illegal. The point we're making is proving that. Right now, they could come up and say, the Appalachian American, you're an illegal immigrant, shove you in prison, go send you to El Salvador. If they don't have to prove it, then it doesn't matter. The point is all they have to do is verify what they're claiming. That should be every American everywhere with what we understand should be like, absolutely. Because governments have never really been on our side. That's what we used to understand. That's what this country was founded on, holding them to account. But it says, where we send them back immediately, back to the amendment. Well, guys, that's the point right there. If you make an amendment that says, if you're here illegally, we send you back immediately. First of all, well, here's what's interesting about that. That would still require due process. This is insane. Like, they just can't wrap their mind around how simple this is. If you're trying to claim they're illegal, the only way you would know they're illegal is if you prove that they're illegal, unless you just choose to trust the government's claim, which is ridiculous. But so the point would be, let's hypothetically say you make an amendment that says that you could deport them without due process. Well, that would be a violation of the original Constitution. It would be repugnant to the reality of it. So it would be null and void per Mayberry versus Madison Supreme Court ruling. I argue most people that make these conversations don't even know half this stuff. But regardless, it says, not to mention the millions we have who have invaded, so you see where this is coming from, with no desire to assimilate. How do you know that, bud? Have you spoken to every one of them? Or are you simply repeating what news shows have told you? Right? I mean, come on. How do we possibly know that millions have invaded with no desire to assimilate? There's some of them, sure. And remind me again why it's their requirement to assimilate to a country? It's not. There's no law that says they have to do what you think they should do in this country. That's why we used to pretend it was a free country where you could come and live out your life the way you wanted to. Apparently not in this current world, where unless Trump says you're not allowed, it's like this weird mindset that suddenly you have to do what we think you should do, otherwise you're not American. It's like, we lost this real fast. He goes, is this what you're cheering for under a guise of somehow being a constitutional purist? These people like this, I don't know whether this is a genuine statement or not. A constitutional purist? What does that even mean? So are you arguing that some of these things should not be abided by? So what happened to shall not be infringed? Inherent rights. Does that only apply when you like what it says? On top of that, under a guise, like I'm trying to manipulate everybody by going, I'm cheering on immigration, or like I'm secretly lying about being the insinuation is that I'm trying to create illegal immigration, flooding this country, and I'm pretending to care about the Constitution. It's like, this, just wait, I respond. But it goes, or based off your perceived convictions. Again, there's such a clear insinuation that I'm a dishonest person. Perceived convictions? No, bud, they're my convictions, and I've laid them out every single day. Some of us are just consistent in those convictions, principles. They don't let them shift because of one day's narrative or what person said in politics. But he says, time to get real, bro, or we will turn into Europe quickly. Whether this was an honest person or not, they have now been taken over by the partisan narratives. Now, look, I'm the first one that will point out the illegal weaponized migration. Yeah, that's obvious. That doesn't change. The point is, no matter what the circumstance, you don't then alter a shall not be infringed inherent outline of your constitutional rights because of Israel flooding your government with, that's the truth. And I can prove it 4 times over. The weaponized migration coming from a foreign government, regardless. And by the way, same with Europe. You can easily prove this, by the way. That does not then still give you the excuse to pretend these things don't apply. The law is already there, right? The reality is you could argue Biden could let it happen, but that's still not, the answer is still go through the process to get it solved. The problem is that we've allowed this to begin with, not one side versus the other. I know it's really tempting to fall into that lazy trap. It's just the government allowing the problem to get you to fall into the solution. He says, no assimilation, neighborhoods where whites can't go. Put your ideology aside and think. Wow, somebody has been ideologically trapped, that's for sure. So here I am talking about the Constitution, regardless of the narrative or the ideology that is absolute, right? That's clearly what our point is. And yet he comes in with the ideology and says, put aside your ideology and think. Very weird. Here's what I said. And I put a screenshot because ultimately I wanted people to see what I wrote. And I said, nowhere am I calling for or support unfettered illegal immigration. Not a great starting point. Regardless of how the world has changed, arguing that because narrative that the Constitution should be ignored, even momentarily, is exactly what we all called out during COVID. And plenty of them still believe that makes sense. Democrats who have argued that we needed to because of whatever, and we don't agree with that, right? It's principle. And if you can't see they're the same thing, you don't want to. And it says, my point in saying that they still think that is that they genuinely believe that. It doesn't make it any less unconstitutional. It goes, now, all right, then I say, now the U.S. government is tricking you in the same way. Again, is this what you're cheering for under a guise of? Nope. And that point, nope, you're wrong. That's not the case. Just care about the inalienable rights that moments ago you two argued shall not be infringed, regardless of the current narrative. All right, that's it. I care about your inalienable rights, regardless of the narrative, like we all should, like you were saying moments ago. And it says, it is about consistency of principles. Lastly, the whole put your ideologies aside and think is an interesting thing to say to me as I stand firm and consistent on my principles. While many do not due to the very ideologies you suggest I'm letting guide me. Nope, just the Constitution. What's guiding you? Fair question. Now, ending, Melnick says, the Trump administration has ended refugee settlements from war-torn regions where people are in horrific scenarios and has cut off support mandated by law to those resettled in the last year. Now, whatever your thoughts about that. And now they're chartering a jet to fly white South Africans here as refugees. So regardless of your thoughts around what he just framed to begin with, the point is what's different here, right? So if you think those things should have been ended, why are you now suddenly okay with these refugees, with these immigrants? It's a very obvious answer here, guys. There's only one real point. I mean, if you're going to make the bottom line is that these people are, in regard to assimilation, very different. They're South Africans. They're Dutch immigrants in South Africa. They speak a different language. They're everyone in the world, most people in the world, and somewhat overlap with English because we force that. The point, though, is that this is different. You could argue there are people that are plenty of places in the world that they push back on that would be easier to assimilate. The point overall is that this is a contradiction. And I'm going to make it very clear, at least one reason why I think this makes sense. Now, we talked about this back on February 9th. Trump to resettle Afrikaners in the United States, which a lot of conservatives said, you're crazy, fake news. Here we are. U.S. plans to receive and aid white South Africans granted refugee status as soon as next week, documents show. The Trump administration is planning to soon receive the first group of white South Africans it says deserve a safe haven in the U.S. Why? Because of alleged racial discrimination and post-apartheid South Africa. Government documents obtained by CBS show. Racial discrimination. Gee, where else is that happening in the world? The initial arrival of the South African nationals who have been granted refugee status could happen as early as next week. Okay, so when Biden does that, it's illegal. But when Trump does it, it's okay. Got it. It says, which described the effort as a stated priority for the Trump administration. So another America First policy, right? Right out of the gate. Or not. Officials have planned a Monday press event at Dulles International Airport in Virginia to welcome the group. Although sources familiar with the effort told CBS News the timing of the plan could change. In February, Trump issued an executive order directing officials to use the U.S. refugee program to resettle Afrikaners, whichever way it goes. An ethnic group in South Africa made up of descendants of European colonists, mostly from the Netherlands. So the refugee program to resettle them, it's weird how you just canceled a lot of that under the guise that it was being abused and then basically used the same thing for groups that you like. The president claimed that Afrikaners faced government-sponsored race-based discrimination. Again, almost like that's happening somewhere else, right? It's almost like there's an obvious example of that they want to ignore while claiming that this one's more important. Now, look, you can dictate your own decision about what you should care about. The point for me is the same argument, that if you're going to pretend that this is something that we want to stop in this country and then allow it when it comes to a Zionist organization, what we're talking about, or simply another group that aligns with what you perceive to be the different as opposed to the other, that you're making half the world, then realize that you're a dishonest person. This is the same point. Or that you're okay as long as they're not brown, which makes you a racist person. Look, that's your choice. You're allowed to be whatever you want, but just acknowledge what this is really about. It says, the president claimed that Afrikaners faced government-sponsored race-based discrimination, citing a law that U.S. conservatives, like South African-born Elon Musk, have said allow racially motivated seizures of land owned by white South Africans. Really? South African government has strongly denied any land confiscations. Well, again, pretty much exactly. You could swap out Israel with that, and it's the same thing happening. Race-based occupations of land, and I'm not even talking about Gaza. That's that too. I'm talking about the ongoing West Bank annexations, the ongoing taking of land in Lebanon, the seizure of all of Syria, all illegal, all with many obvious racial overtones and supremacist mindsets, even according to the Jewish B'Tselem organization that calls this Jewish supremacy in Israel. All very easy to see. But that's okay. They'll support that. They'll fund that. But over here, we'll support the minority in the conversation. Remember, let's be clear about this, by the way. Israel was directly involved, which we'll get into next, with South Africa's apartheid and building nuclear weapons, or at least they're going in that direction, and ethnic weapons. All this is on the record. Created a racial cesspit of discrimination. Aligned themselves with the same discussion about the Palestinians. Okay. Now that was then overthrown, rather ended, because people called it out as apartheid. And since then, and let's be clear, horrible things happened. Since then, there has been somewhat of a response back in the other direction, but not even a fraction of what we were seeing all those years with the apartheid. And yet people like this are highlighting that as the victim. But in some cases, you could argue, yes, there is any racial-based violence is wrong. But to pretend like these people are the only victims in this conversation, this is about racial politics. And I promise you, this ties back to Israel. It says the hastily arranged initiative to welcome Afrikaners stands in stark contrast to Trump's move to ban most other refugees from entering the United States. The processing of Afrikaners granted refugee status also has been unusually fast. What do you know? Funny how you can fast track what you want. Before Mr. Trump's second term, the State Department said the refugee process on average took between 18 to 24 months to complete due to background checks, medical screenings, other interviews. Right. So worries about whether illnesses or, foreign government infiltration, But guess what? The Afrikaners ready to travel to the U.S. have gone through that process in a matter of months, even weeks. Great. So you just forego background checks and medical screenings. Why? Because somebody wants this to happen. Here is the executive order addressing egregious actions of the Republic of South Africa. Pretty sure I haven't seen one of these about Israel. Well, here's what it says. In shocking disregard. Now, again, to the point, that's not to say that we shouldn't call this out, but the point is about hypocrisy of the government and whether they care about either of these things. It's about what they can use for their agenda. That's not unique to left or right. It's your government. In shocking disregard of citizens' rights, South Africa recently enacted Expropriation Act 13 of 2024. It says to enable the government of South Africa to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. Now, yet they're arguing that's not the full picture. That's not what I'm getting into today. We're talking about people seizing with property without compensation. I've never seen a more obvious conversation about exactly that than what's been going on for 77 years in Israel. The reality that they are seizing property illegally from Palestinians literally every day. Adelson paid Trump hundreds of millions of dollars so they could take land in West Bank, which is exactly the point. All on the record. I just think it's insanely dishonest and just hypocritical for them to act like this is enough to remove. I mean, they're refusing to take refugees from damn near anywhere, which is not necessarily something we should always be. I agree. It's not something we right now, especially like with funding foreign anything. These things should be paused and stopped until we understand what's going on. Not the ones you don't like versus the ones you do. Like it's the consistency. This says this act follows countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity in employment, education, and business, and hateful rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners. Yeah, you're basically describing the Gaza people. In addition, or rather Palestinians, South Africa has taken aggressive positions towards the United States and its allies, including accusing Israel, not Hamas, of genocide. Well, here we go. Now it becomes clear. South Africa, remember, was the leading entity in the case against Israel in the international court. So now you start to see where this all fits together. Now you also understand why these people have been focused on, because ultimately you're going to find a very clear overlap between Afrikaners and Israel. South Africans and Israel, home away from home for white colonists. Brothers in Arms, Israel's secret pact with Pretoria, which was South Africa. We'll go through it. But so the point is they're saying that they are basically, where was the term they used? Taking aggressive positions towards the United States, which I don't even note, by the way. I don't see that. They're talking about their claim that Israel is doing what we all know they're doing and that's somehow aggressively wrong. And reinvigorating its relations with Iran. Okay. They're not allowed to have agreements with foreign governments. It's about what the U.S. and Israel want from them. And if they do something else, you're terrorists now, is the way this goes. It is the policy of the United States that as long as South Africa continues these unjust and immoral practices, but we don't care if Israel does them though, right? A, the United States shall not provide aid or assistance. So, well, isn't that already supposed to stop anyway? B, the United States shall promote the resettlement of Afrikaners, refugees escaping government-sponsored race-based discrimination, including racially discriminating. You get it. So we're going to jam these people into the United States, despite the argument being we're going to end immigration, but only the ones we like are okay. Here, Middle East Eye, South Africans in Israel, a home away from home for white colonists. Here's what it says. This immigration should be seen as in the context of the long history of collusion and collaboration between the two settler colonies. The Netherlands, the Dutch immigrant South African colony, and the illegal occupation of Palestine. The Afrikaner Jan Smuts, South African prime minister, 2 different times, 1919, 1924, 1939, 1948, interesting timing, was a major supporter of Zionist colonialization of Palestine. So much so that socialist Zionist colonists in Palestine would later name a kibbutz, the major institution of master race socialism, after him. It's always funny how the Republicans who blindly support Zionism don't recognize those very clear political leanings. But what's funny, what's alarming, so now it becomes clear that basically the overlap of these things is what, you could even argue that it started with this driving the other. But either way, the radical settler colonialist apartheid racist mindset was why they came together. These are the same, that is the origin point of the same group we're talking about bringing to the United States. You just can't keep missing this stuff. It's literally everywhere and everything we talk about. Zionists believe, it says, that the Palestinians were not unlike Black African natives, and especially those from the former German colonies, such as Namibia, who Smuts had insisted had no rights to self-determination. That's the Afrikaners. That these Black people don't have right to self-determination. Yeah, you see where the overlap comes into play? These people were, Smuts said, barbarians to whom it would be impracticable to apply any idea of political self-determination in the European sense. So in other words, these Black people are too dumb to get self-determination, or too unable, just disgusting levels of racism. These African settler colonies would function as a model for Zionists in Palestine. That's the historical context. Here's The Guardian. 2006. Brothers in Arms, Israel's secret pact with Pretoria. That's what it was called before. During the Second World War, with future South African Prime Minister John Vorster was interned as a Nazi sympathizer. 3 decades later, he was being feted in Jerusalem. In the second part of his remarkable special report, Chris McGreal investigates the clandestine alliance between Israel and the apartheid regime in South Africa, cemented with the ultimate gift of friendship, A-bomb technology. They worked on bombs, both ethnic and potentially nuclear bombs. And they were high-fiving about their colonial settler project and how they hated people who weren't white. That's what we're talking about, guys. And I actually want to go through this more in the future. Here's one from Haaretz. Cleansed by the Torah, why these Afrikaners converted to Judaism and moved to Israel. Here's just basically, I think these are all just overview. Here is what Brave had to say. The connection between Afrikaners and Israel has roots in shared histories of apartheid and settler colonialism. Many Afrikaners have converted to Judaism and moved to Israel, often settling in the West Bank settlements, the illegal occupied settlements. Historically, South Africa and Israel had a close relationship during the apartheid era. Israel provided military and technological support to apartheid South Africa, one of the worst examples of the racist apartheid regimes. Israel's the worst today, including collaboration on nuclear weapons. In recent years, the relationship has shifted. President Donald Trump's administration has prioritized the resettlement of these very Afrikaner refugees in the United States, citing racial discrimination. However, South African officials have criticized this move, arguing that the claims of discrimination are unfounded and politically motivated. Well, that's for you to decide. The point today is the obvious overlap to, the same thing we're seeing damn near everywhere. That whether it's Trump's decision, think about why it makes sense for Trump to make a big stand against any immigration, right? And then allowing a very big claim of immigrants into this country because of an Israel overlap, as I see it. My point would be, why would he allow that? Why wouldn't you just wait? I think it's because that's what somebody wants. NBC News says a group of white South Africans will be arriving in Washington, D.C. on Monday by way of a State Department chartered plane to be resettled in the U.S. as refugees. Melnick points out, normally refugees have to pay for their own travel to the United States by taking out travel loans, which have to be paid back. So kind of an indentured servitude kind of starting point. However, Trump has fully suspended the refugee program for all other people in the world, except for white South Africans, who he's flying here at taxpayer expense. Can you imagine if this was, Obama, but Bill Clinton doing this with a group that you didn't like? They would be losing their minds the same way they did. This is hypocrisy. Lastly, AF Post, Trump's daily deportation numbers lag 10% behind Biden's despite the White House's PR campaign. Read about it right there. Fox News reported the same thing. Numbers show no mass deportations of migrants. Federal data shows there has not been a significant jump in immigrants deported since Trump took office. The numbers show removals are lagging behind levels during the Biden administration. Now, of course, you could argue it's because they've tried to stop it. The point is, had they just deported people like normal, which they were allowed to do, and they still are, this wouldn't even happen. But the point is they wouldn't be able to remove the people that they don't have evidence for, and that's the whole point. Just simply trying to highlight a basic statistic that if you're arguing this is the different time, well, then explain to me why at this time in Biden's administration he had deported more than this. Or are we just going to pretend those are all lies? It's easy to do that, isn't it? Just to go, oh, well, that's just a Democrat lie without any evidence to back it up. We'll leave it there today. I just think it's very, very, very clear that we're being gaslit to a degree that I've never seen before. The evidence is there. I'd like to believe that most everybody out there listening are honest people that care and that they're doing their best to convince you why you shouldn't. You know better. Stand with your principles, err on the side of that. Make sure you recognize that there are people out there trying to create kind of, well-crafted arguments. Some of them really clumsy and dumb, but some of them well-crafted in order to get you to think that this is what we should be supporting. Don't fall for it. I'm going to end with a clip again that I think is very important, just because I do think this is where this is going. I feel very strongly that based on what's already happened or what's continued to happen, the escalation of this, that this is going to get to a point to where if we allow it, Americans will be next. And I wouldn't even float that if they hadn't said it 5 times. 5 times. So thank you for tuning in today, guys. Please continue to call this stuff out and recognize how much of this is with Zionist groups literally handpicking people to be deported, that they deport without any due diligence and turns out they're wrong about. Or Americans almost being sent, or innocent people with no criminal record who are here legally being routinely seeming sent to foreign countries. There's a very alarming thing happening right now. And the Constitution itself pretty damn clear shows you that what they're doing is wrong, and that the Rubios and Bondies and Millers either don't know that, which is alarming in its own right, or are willing to lie to you about the foundational document of this country for reasons that are worth your consideration. I tend to think it's for obvious foreign policy dynamics, but I'll leave it there today. Thank you for caring about this. Please find ways to support this platform if you believe in what we're doing. Plenty of links down below every video at the website, thelastamericanvagabond.com. I love you all. Thank you for tuning in today. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported. For his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too.
Profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I'm sorry to say, is coming.